Most people think they know Mary's story, but 90% of her life remains completely hidden from popular knowledge. Beyond the nativity scene, beyond the virgin birth, lies an incredible journey of a woman who witnessed miracles, endured unimaginable hardship, and displayed a faith that would shake the foundations of the world. From ancient prophecies that foretold her coming, to her mysterious early years, to the terrifying flight to Egypt, to standing at the foot of the cross watching her son die, Mary's complete story reads like the most dramatic epic ever written. Tonight, we're piecing together every fragment of her remarkable life, from scripture, historical records, and ancient traditions, to reveal the full picture of the Sacred Mother of the Messiah. But before we dive in, if you're new to this channel, consider hitting that like and subscribe button if you haven't already. Your support means we can continue producing more valuable content to help you learn something new or unwind. Also, let us know where you're watching from and what time it is. We'd love to hear from you. So without further ado, let's get started, shall we? Long before Mary drew her first breath, the world waited in shadow. Ancient Judea lay beneath the heavy hand of Rome, its people scattered like seeds on rocky ground. The once proud kingdom of David had become a distant memory, its glory faded like evening light. Roman soldiers walked the dusty streets of Jerusalem, their sandals echoed against stone paths where prophets once spoke of better days. Tax collectors sat at their tables, counting coins that flowed away from Jewish hands into Roman treasuries. The temple still stood, magnificent and golden, but even its sacred walls could not keep out the weight of foreign rule. In this time of darkness, hope flickered like a candle in the wind. Mothers whispered old stories to their children, stories of a coming king, a promised one who would set things right. They spoke of ancient words from Isaiah, of a virgin who would bear a son. These tales passed from lip to ear, generation to generation, like precious treasures hidden in simple clay jars. The religious leaders of the day carried heavy burdens. Some, like the Pharisees, tried to keep the faith pure through careful rules and traditions. Others, like the Sadducees, made peace with Roman power. All waited for something they could barely name. The air itself seemed thick with expectation. Common people felt this weight most deeply. Farmers struggled under Roman taxes, fishermen worked their nets while foreign ships sailed their waters. Craftsmen shaped wood and stone, wondering if their children would ever taste freedom. Yet even in their daily toil, something stirred, a quiet knowing that change was coming. Synagogues filled on the Sabbath with voices lifted in ancient songs. The words of the Psalms rose like incense, carrying prayers and hopes to heaven. Children learned Hebrew letters, tracing prophecies with their small fingers. Each word held the promise of better days ahead. The marketplace buzzed with rumors. Some spoke of rebels hiding in the hills, others whispered of holy men who claimed to hear God's voice. False messiahs came and went like summer storms, leaving only disappointment in their wake. But the true hope lived deeper, in the quiet hearts of those who knew how to wait. Women drew water from wells where their grandmothers had drawn before them. They sang as they worked, melodies that carried the memory of miracles. Their songs spoke of Sarah's laughter, of Hannah's prayers answered, of Esther's courage. They knew that God often worked through the unexpected, through the small and humble. In the temple courts, priests offered sacrifices according to ancient law. The smoke rose daily, carrying the prayers of a people who refused to forget. The ritual cleansing, the careful observance, the reading of sacred scrolls, all of this kept the flame of faith burning in dark times. Young girls grew up hearing stories of heroines. They learned of Miriam, who led the women in dance after crossing the Red Sea. They heard of Deborah, who judged Israel with wisdom and strength. These tales planted seeds in tender hearts, preparing soil for something extraordinary. The Romans built their roads and aqueducts, their theaters and baths. They brought their gods and their customs, their language and their law. But they could not build their way into Jewish hearts. There, in the secret places of the soul, another kingdom waited to be born. Shepherds watched their flocks on hillsides around Bethlehem. They knew these fields held memory. Here Ruth had walked behind the reapers. Here David had tended his father's sheep. The land itself seemed to whisper of promises yet to be fulfilled. Each sunrise brought the world one day closer to the moment when heaven would touch earth. In small villages throughout Galilee and Judea, families gathered for evening meals. They broke bread together and shared the simple food of common people. Oil lamps cast warm light on weathered faces as fathers told their children about the God who remembered his people. These quiet moments held more power than all the armies of Rome. The world was ready, though it did not know. Like a woman heavy with child, creation itself groaned and waited. The stage was set, the players in their places. All that remained was for the curtain to rise on the greatest story ever told. In this ancient world of dust and stone, of hope and heartache, a young girl would soon be born. Her name would be Mary, and through her, everything would change. But for now, the world simply waited, breathing in and out with the rhythm of ordinary days, unaware that the extraordinary was about to begin. The darkness was deepest just before the dawn, and in a small house in Nazareth, that dawn was coming closer with each passing day. The lineage of Mary, Mary's story begins not with her birth, but with the long line of souls who came before her. Like a golden thread woven through the fabric of time, her ancestry stretched back through generations of faith and struggle, triumph and sorrow. The Gospel of Matthew traces a genealogy through Joseph, Mary's betrothed. Though she would conceive by divine miracle, this lineage still mattered. In Jewish culture, the husband's line determined the child's place in society. Through Joseph, Jesus would claim descent from King David, fulfilling ancient prophecies about the Messiah's royal heritage. But Mary had her own bloodline, her own sacred thread connecting her to the promises of old. Though the Gospels remain quiet about her parentage, tradition speaks of Joachim and Anne, her devout parents who prayed for a child and received more than they could have imagined. The women who came before Mary shine like stars in the night sky of Scripture. Tamar, who showed courage when justice failed. Rahab, whose faith saved her family. Ruth, whose loyalty created a legacy. Bathsheba, who found redemption after tragedy. Each name carries its own story of survival and grace. These ancestral mothers faced their own impossible moments. Tamar disguised herself to claim her rights when the system failed her. Rahab hid enemy spies because she believed in their God. Ruth left everything familiar to follow her mother-in-law into an uncertain future. Bathsheba endured loss and scandal before finding her place in the royal line. Their stories prepared the way for Mary's own impossible moment. They showed that God often works through the unexpected, the broken, the willing. The lineage flowing toward Mary was not perfect, it was real. It carried the full weight of human experience, the complete range of joy and sorrow. In the quiet hills of Galilee, families passed down more than names and dates. They shared the actual breadth of their ancestors' experiences. Children learned not just who their great-grandparents were, but how they lived, what they believed, how they faced their darkest hours. Mary's family tree grew in soil, watered by tears and tended by prayers. Her ancestors knew slavery in Egypt and freedom in the Promised Land. They experienced the glory of Solomon's temple and the grief of its destruction. They survived exile and celebrated return. Each generation added its own chapter to the ongoing story of God's faithfulness. The royal line of David ran like a river through this ancestry. David himself, the shepherd boy who became king, the warrior poet who wrote songs of faith. His heart for God blazed so bright that centuries later people still spoke of him as the standard for godly leadership. The promise made to David that his throne would endure forever lived in every descendant's heart. Solomon followed David, bringing wisdom and peace to Israel. His reign marked the height of the kingdom's earthly glory. Yet even Solomon's story carried warning that earthly success could lead the heart away from its true source. The lineage toward Mary held both promise and caution. The line continued through times of division and conquest. Kings rose and fell. Some, like Hezekiah and Josiah, brought the people back to God. Others led them astray. Through it all, the promise persisted. God's faithfulness proved stronger than human weakness. When the kingdom fell and the people went into exile, the royal line seemed broken. Yet God's promises do not depend on earthly thrones. In Babylon, by foreign rivers, the descendants of David kept the faith alive. They sang songs of Zion and taught their children to remember. The line lived on in their hearts when it could not live on any throne. The return from exile brought new hope. Though they ruled no kingdom, the descendants of David knew their identity. They carried within them the genetic memory of greatness, the spiritual DNA of divine promise. Each generation brought the world closer to the fulfillment they had been promised. Mary's more immediate ancestors lived humble lives in Galilee. They were not wealthy or powerful by worldly standards, yet they carried within their ordinary existence the extraordinary weight of divine purpose. They were links in a chain that stretched from Abraham to eternity. The blood flowing in Mary's veins carried the faith of Sarah, who laughed at God's impossible promise and then watched it come true. It held the courage of Esther, who risked everything to save her people. It pulsed with the loyalty of Ruth, who chose love over comfort. This lineage was not just about bloodlines, it was about soul lines. The spiritual inheritance passed down through Mary's family was richer than gold. Stories of miracles witnessed, prayers answered, faith rewarded. Each generation added its own testimony to the growing chorus of God's goodness. When Mary opened her eyes for the first time, she carried within her the accumulated prayers of centuries. Her ancestors' hopes lived in her heartbeat. Their faith flowed in her blood. She was not just a young girl in Nazareth, she was the living culmination of 1,000 promises, the walking answer to 1,000 prayers. The lineage that led to Mary was preparation for miracle. Every generation, every story, every triumph and tragedy had been leading to this moment when a young woman would say yes to the impossible and change the world forever. The betrothal to Joseph. In the gentle hills of Nazareth, where olive trees cast shadows on dusty paths, a young woman named Mary was about to take the first step toward her destiny. The customs of her people would soon bind her life to that of a carpenter named Joseph, setting in motion events that would reshape the world. Betrothal in Mary's time was far more than modern engagement. It was a sacred contract, nearly as binding as marriage itself. Families negotiated these arrangements with great care, considering not just love, but lineage, character, and faith. A girl's future depended on this choice, and wise parents took the responsibility seriously. Mary likely had little say in the selection of Joseph. This was not cruelty, but culture. Parents chose partners based on wisdom and experience, knowing that young love could fade while mutual respect and shared values endured. They looked for a man who would provide well, protect faithfully, and honor God consistently. Joseph emerged from David's royal line, though his hands were rough from working wood rather than soft from wearing crowns. In Nazareth, a carpenter was a respected craftsman, skilled in building everything from ox yokes to roof beams. His work required precision, patience, and strength, qualities that spoke well of his character. The Hebrew word for Joseph's profession, tekton, meant more than just woodworker. He was a builder, someone who could work with stone and metal as well as timber. In a small town like Nazareth, such skills made him valuable to the community. Houses needed repair, farming tools required replacement, and furniture wore out with use. Joseph's reputation mattered more than his income. In a close community where everyone knew everyone, a man's character was public knowledge. Joseph was known as righteous, a word that carried deep meaning in Jewish culture. It spoke of someone who lived according to God's law, who dealt fairly with others, who could be trusted with precious things. The betrothal ceremony would have been simple but meaningful. Joseph's family would approach Mary's family with a proposal, offering a bride price that honored her worth. This was not purchasing a wife, but acknowledging the value of the woman and the cost of raising her. The amount reflected respect, not ownership. Mary's parents, Joachim and Anne, according to tradition, would have considered the offer carefully. They knew Joseph's family had watched him grow from boy to man, had seen his work and his character. The match would bring their daughter security and honor, two precious gifts in an uncertain world. When the families agreed, the betrothal became official through ceremony and contract. Joseph would place a ring on Mary's finger or give her a coin, making a public declaration of commitment. From this moment, she belonged to him legally, though they would not live together until the wedding feast, usually a year later. This waiting period served important purposes. It proved the bride's purity. If she was found to be pregnant, the child could not be her husband's. It also allowed time for preparation. Mary would learn the specific ways of Joseph's household, while he would prepare their future home and save money for their life together. Mary was probably between 12 and 15 years old at betrothal, the typical age for Jewish girls of her time. This seems young by modern standards, but in a world where life expectancy was shorter and responsibilities came earlier, it was normal. She would have spent her childhood learning the skills of household management from her mother. Joseph was likely somewhat older, perhaps in his early 20s. He would have completed his training as a craftsman and been ready to support a family. The age difference was practical. He needed time to establish himself before taking on the responsibility of a wife and children. The months of betrothal would have been filled with quiet preparation. Mary would have woven cloth and prepared her dowry, the household items she would bring to marriage. Joseph would have crafted furniture for their home, perhaps a bed frame, storage chests, or a dining table. Each piece was made with love and hope for their future together. During this time, they would have had limited contact. Unmarried couples did not spend time alone together. Their interaction was supervised and formal, yet they would have observed each other during community gatherings, Sabbath services, and festivals. Quiet glances and gentle words would have built the foundation of affection. Mary's heart during these months remains a mystery. Did she feel excitement about her future, fear about leaving her childhood home, hope about the man she would soon call husband? The Gospels preserve her silence, letting us wonder about the inner life of this extraordinary young woman. Joseph, too, remains largely silent in the records. We can imagine him working at his bench, smoothing wood with careful hands, thinking about the girl who would soon share his name. Perhaps he felt the weight of responsibility, the deep desire to prove worthy of the trust placed in him. Their betrothal was blessed by families and community, but it was also ordinary. Nazareth had seen many such unions, many young couples taking the ancient steps toward marriage and family. No one could have guessed that this particular betrothal would become the hinge on which history would turn. The customs that bound Mary and Joseph were ancient and tested. They provided structure for society, protection for the vulnerable, and framework for family life. Yet these same customs would soon be stretched to their breaking point by a miracle that no law or tradition could have anticipated. As Mary and Joseph moved through their months of engagement, heaven watched and waited. The stage was set, the players in position. Soon, an angel would arrive with news that would transform their ordinary betrothal into the beginning of the most extraordinary story ever told. The Annunciation, a world stopped in time. The morning began like any other in Nazareth. Mary woke to familiar sounds, roosters calling, merchants setting up their stalls, children playing in narrow streets. She could not have known that before the day ended, the entire course of human history would pivot on her response to an impossible question. Luke's Gospel places the Annunciation in the 6th month of Elizabeth's pregnancy, spring in the hill country of Galilee. Mary was likely in her family's home, perhaps helping with daily tasks or spending quiet time in prayer. Jewish girls of her age often found moments of solitude for reflection, particularly those being raised in households of faith. The angel Gabriel appeared to her without warning. One moment she was alone with her thoughts, the next she faced a being of pure light and power. The sight must have been overwhelming. Angels in Scripture rarely appeared in gentle, comforting forms. They came with the authority of heaven itself, carrying messages that changed everything. Gabriel's first words reveal much about Mary's character. Greetings, you who are highly favored, the Lord is with you. The angel's greeting suggests God had been watching Mary, noting her heart, her faith, her readiness for the impossible. She was not chosen randomly, but purposefully, selected for qualities that heaven valued. Mary's response shows wisdom beyond her years. She was greatly troubled by the greeting and wondered what it meant. She did not dismiss the supernatural encounter or assume she was dreaming. Instead, she listened carefully, trying to understand. Her thoughtful response revealed a mind capable of grappling with mystery. The angel continued with words that would echo through eternity. Do not be afraid, Mary. You have found favor with God. You will conceive and give birth to a son, and you are to call him Jesus. He will be great and will be called the Son of the Most High. Each phrase carried staggering implications. This child would not be ordinary. He would inherit David's throne and rule forever. His kingdom would have no end. Mary was being asked to become the mother of the long-awaited Messiah, the one her people had hoped for through centuries of waiting. Mary's question was practical and profound. How will this be, since I am a virgin? She was not doubting God's power, but seeking understanding of his method. Her betrothal to Joseph was still months away from consummation. The biological impossibility of the announcement was clear to her. Gabriel's answer introduced a concept that would become central to Christian theology. The Holy Spirit will come on you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you. So the Holy One to be born will be called the Son of God. This child would be conceived not through human agency, but through divine intervention. The angel offered proof of God's miraculous power. Elizabeth, Mary's elderly cousin, was also pregnant, despite her advanced age. Nothing is impossible with God, Gabriel declared, providing Mary with living evidence that the supernatural was already at work in her family. Mary faced the most momentous decision in human history. She could have refused, could have asked for time to consider, could have demanded more proof or explanation. Instead, she offered the words that would make the incarnation possible. I am the Lord's servant. May your word to me be fulfilled. Her acceptance was complete and immediate. She did not know how she would explain this to Joseph, to her parents, to her community. She did not understand all the implications of what she was agreeing to. She simply said yes to God's plan, trusting his goodness even when she could not see the path ahead. The moment of Mary's consent was when eternity intersected with time. The second person of the Trinity, who had existed from the beginning, took on human flesh in Mary's womb. The infinite became finite, the eternal entered time, the creator became created. All of this hinged on one young woman's willingness to trust. The biological miracle was only part of the wonder. Mary's body would nourish the one who created her. Her heartbeat would sustain the one who spoke the stars into existence. She would teach language to the Word, who spoke the universe into being. The paradoxes were as beautiful as they were mysterious. After delivering his message, Gabriel departed, leaving Mary alone with the greatest secret in history. The Word was becoming flesh within her, but she could tell no one. The Messiah was coming, but she could not announce it. She carried the hope of the world in her womb and in her heart. The silence following the angel's departure must have been profound. Mary was the only human being who knew that the long-awaited salvation was beginning. She held the secret of the incarnation, the knowledge that God was keeping his promises in ways no one had imagined. Her life had been ordinary until this moment, helping with household tasks, learning from her mother, preparing for marriage. Now she carried within her body the answer to every prayer, the fulfillment of every prophecy, the hope of every generation. The weight of this calling was staggering, yet Mary's response showed she was equal to the task. Her immediate acceptance revealed a heart already surrendered to God's will. She had been prepared for this moment not through special training or supernatural knowledge, but through a lifetime of simple faith and quiet trust. The Annunciation was complete, but its effects would ripple through time. Mary's yes would echo through centuries, enabling the redemption of the world. In saying yes to God, she said yes to joy and sorrow, to wonder and pain, to the highest honor and the deepest grief. She said yes to becoming the mother of the Savior. As Gabriel's light faded and normal daylight returned to her room, Mary was left to contemplate the impossible. Her life had been transformed in a single conversation. She was no longer just a young woman from Nazareth. She was the chosen vessel for the Word made flesh, the human gateway through which salvation would enter the world. Mary's inner turmoil and acceptance. In the quiet moments after Gabriel's departure, Mary sat in stunned silence. The angel's words echoed in her mind like ripples on still water, each repetition bringing fresh waves of wonder and terror. She was alone with the most incredible secret in human history, and the weight of it pressed down on her young shoulders. The immediate questions came first, practical and pressing. How would she tell Joseph? What would her parents say? The law of Moses was clear about unmarried women found to be pregnant. The consequences could be severe, even deadly. Her community would not understand divine conception. They would see only scandal, shame, and broken trust. Mary's mind raced through possible explanations, each one sounding more impossible than the last. Who would believe that an angel had appeared to her? Who would accept that the child growing within her was conceived by the Holy Spirit? The truth itself was so extraordinary that speaking it might seem like desperate fiction. The social implications terrified her. In her small town, reputation was everything. Unmarried pregnancy brought shame not just on the woman, but on her entire family. Her father's name would be dishonored. Her mother would face whispered accusations of poor guidance. The ripple effects would touch everyone she loved. Joseph's reaction worried her most. He was a righteous man, devoted to God's law. How could she ask him to believe the impossible? How could she expect him to take on the scandal of marrying a woman pregnant with another's child? Even if he accepted her story, what would it cost him in the community's eyes? Mary found herself caught between two fears, the fear of human judgment and the fear of disappointing God. Both paths seemed to lead through valleys of suffering. Yet somewhere in the darkness of her confusion, a light began to grow. It was the memory of Gabriel's words, "Nothing is impossible with God." She began to remember the stories her mother had told her, the accounts of other women who had faced impossible situations. Sarah, who laughed at the promise of a child in her old age, then held Isaac in her arms. Hannah, who wept for years over her empty womb, then sang for joy over Samuel's birth. God had a history of making the impossible real. The genealogies she had learned as a child took on new meaning. The Messiah would come through David's line, and now through her, that ancient promise was beginning to unfold. She was not just an unmarried girl in trouble. She was a chosen instrument in God's redemptive plan. The realization was both humbling and strengthening. Mary's faith began to wrestle with her fear. She had grown up believing in a God who kept his promises, who worked through ordinary people to accomplish extraordinary things. Her ancestors had faced their own impossible moments and found God faithful. Could she do less than trust the same God who had proven himself through generations? Prayer became her refuge in those first hours. She poured out her heart to the God who had chosen her, seeking strength for the path ahead. The child within her was already a bridge between heaven and earth, and she found herself drawing on divine strength she had never known she possessed. The memories of Elizabeth's unexpected pregnancy, which Gabriel had mentioned, brought comfort. Her elderly cousin would understand miraculous conception because she was living her own miracle. Perhaps Elizabeth could provide the support and understanding that others might not offer. The thought of sharing her burden with another woman who knew God's supernatural power brought relief. As the hours passed, Mary's acceptance deepened. She began to understand that her yes to God was not a single moment, but an ongoing choice. Each day would require fresh surrender, renewed trust, and continued faith. The Annunciation was not just about conception, but about a lifetime of cooperation with God's plan. She thought about the child growing within her, the Son of the Most High, the promised Messiah, the one who would save his people from their sins. Her baby would be the answer to centuries of prayer, the fulfillment of ancient prophecies, the hope of the world. The magnitude of this calling overwhelmed her with awe. Mary realized that her suffering, when it came, would be redemptive. Her pain would participate in God's plan to heal the world's pain. Her sacrifice would enable the ultimate sacrifice. Her willingness to be misunderstood would help bring understanding to all humanity. The thought transformed her fear into purpose. The young woman who had awakened that morning thinking about wedding preparations and household tasks was gone. In her place stood the Theotokos, the God-bearer, the one chosen to bring the divine into human flesh. The transformation was not just physical, but spiritual, as profound as the miracle happening within her womb. Mary's inner turmoil began to settle into something deeper than peace. It became a foundation of trust. She could not see the future clearly, but she could see the God who held the future. Her circumstances might be difficult, but her calling was glorious. Her path might be painful, but her destination was certain. The questions that had tormented her earlier remained unanswered, but they no longer seemed as important. God, who had performed the miracle of conception, could surely handle the complications of explanation. The one who had chosen her for this impossible task would surely provide the grace needed to fulfill it. In the growing darkness of evening, Mary's heart found its rhythm. Fear gave way to faith, confusion to clarity, turmoil to trust. She was the Lord's servant, and his word would be fulfilled. Whatever lay ahead, joy or sorrow, honor or shame, understanding or rejection, she would walk it with the God who had called her name. The girl who had said yes to the angel was learning to say yes to everything that yes would require. Um, Her acceptance was becoming not just a moment of consent, but a way of life, a posture of the heart that would carry her through the darkest valleys and the highest peaks of human experience. Mary's inner journey from fear to faith became a pattern for all who would follow her son. In learning to trust God's goodness despite impossible circumstances, she blazed a trail that others would walk for generations to come. Her turmoil and her acceptance both became part of the gospel story, showing that even chosen ones must choose, even called ones must answer, even blessed ones must believe. The journey to Elizabeth. With the angel's words still echoing in her heart, Mary made a decision that would provide the first confirmation of the miracle growing within her. She would travel to the hill country of Judea to visit her cousin Elizabeth, the elderly woman who was experiencing her own impossible pregnancy. The journey would take her away from the whispers and worried glances that were beginning to follow her in Nazareth. The trip from Galilee to the Judean hills was no simple afternoon walk. For a young woman, possibly already showing the early signs of pregnancy, it required careful planning and considerable courage. The distance was roughly 80 miles, a journey that would take several days through rugged terrain and potentially dangerous territory. Mary likely traveled with a caravan of pilgrims or merchants, as women rarely traveled alone in her time. These groups provided safety and companionship on the dusty roads that connected the scattered communities of Palestine. The slow pace of walking would have given her plenty of time to think about the extraordinary circumstances that had changed her life so completely. The road wound through valleys and over hills, past olive groves and vineyard terraces carved into the mountainsides. Mary would have seen the seasonal workers tending their crops, shepherds guiding their flocks to pasture, and fellow travelers making their own journeys for business or family reasons. The ordinary rhythms of life continued around her while she carried the most extraordinary secret in the world. During the long hours of walking, Mary must have wondered how Elizabeth would react to her news. Would her older cousin believe the account of angelic visitation? Would she understand the divine miracle that was taking place? The angel had mentioned Elizabeth's own miraculous pregnancy as proof of God's power. But would that make Elizabeth more or less likely to accept Mary's incredible story? The anticipation stronger as Mary drew closer to her destination. Elizabeth and her husband Zechariah lived in a town in the hill country, traditionally identified as En Karam, just west of Jerusalem. Zechariah was a priest, which meant their household would be one of deep faith and careful observance of religious traditions. Such a home might be more open to recognizing God's supernatural work. When Mary finally arrived at Elizabeth's door, tired from the journey and probably nervous about the conversation ahead, she called out a simple greeting. What happened next would confirm everything the angel Gabriel had told her and provide the encouragement she desperately needed. At the sound of Mary's voice, the baby in Elizabeth's womb leaped for joy. Elizabeth herself was filled with the Holy Spirit and immediately recognized the significance of her young cousin's visit. Without any explanation from Mary, without any prior knowledge of the Annunciation, Elizabeth cried out in a loud voice, "Blessed are you among women, and blessed is the child you will bear." The words must have hit Mary like a wave of relief and wonder. Here was confirmation that what she had experienced was real, that the miracle growing within her was recognized even by the unborn child in Elizabeth's womb. The baby who would become John the Baptist was already responding to the presence of his Lord, even though both were still in their mother's wombs. Elizabeth's next words were even more remarkable. "But why am I so favored that the mother of my Lord should come to me?" The elderly woman, guided by the Holy Spirit, immediately understood that Mary was carrying the Messiah. She recognized the fulfillment of centuries of prophecy in her young cousin's pregnancy. The meeting between these two expectant mothers was a moment of pure recognition and joy. Elizabeth had been living with her own miracle for 6 months, experiencing the wonder of unexpected pregnancy in her old age. Now she found herself face to face with an even greater miracle, the incarnation of God Himself in human flesh. Elizabeth's blessing continued. Blessed is she who has believed that the Lord would fulfill His promises to her. These words acknowledged Mary's faith and courage in accepting God's incredible plan. Elizabeth recognized that Mary had not only received a divine calling, but had responded to it with trust and obedience. The validation Mary received from Elizabeth was profound and necessary. After days or weeks of carrying her secret alone, wondering if she had somehow imagined the angelic encounter, Mary now had divine confirmation through another person. The Holy Spirit, speaking through Elizabeth, provided the reassurance she needed to continue trusting God's plan. The two women embraced, sharing the joy of their mutual miracles. Elizabeth's pregnancy had prepared her to understand and accept Mary's even more extraordinary situation. Both were experiencing God's power to create life in impossible circumstances. Elizabeth beyond the normal age of childbearing, Mary without the normal process of conception. In that moment of recognition and blessing, Mary's heart overflowed with praise. The relief, the joy, the overwhelming sense of God's goodness culminated in the magnificent prayer that has become known as the Magnificat. Her soul magnified the Lord, and her spirit rejoiced in God, her Savior. The journey to Elizabeth had provided exactly what Mary needed: confirmation of God's work in her life, support from another woman experiencing divine miracle, and the encouragement to continue trusting even when the path ahead remained unclear. She had found a sanctuary where her secret was not only safe but celebrated. The meeting between Mary and Elizabeth became a bridge between the Old Covenant and the New. Elizabeth represented the culmination of God's work under the law, the faithful wife of a priest, blessed with a child who would prepare the way for the Messiah. Mary represented the beginning of something entirely new, the incarnation of God Himself, the fulfillment of every promise ever made. Their time together strengthened both women for the challenges ahead. Elizabeth would face the community's amazement at her late-in-life pregnancy and the strange circumstances surrounding her husband's temporary muteness. Mary would return to Nazareth carrying not only her divine child, but also the confidence that God was indeed working through her in ways beyond human understanding. The hill country of Judea had witnessed the first meeting between the forerunner and the Messiah, between the voice crying in the wilderness and the Word made flesh. Two mothers, two miracles, two pieces of God's redemptive plan coming together in recognition and joy. Joseph's dilemma and the dream back in Nazareth. While Mary basked in Elizabeth's blessing, Joseph was struggling with the most difficult decision of his life. The woman he was pledged to marry had returned from her journey to Judea visibly pregnant, and he knew with certainty that the child was not his. The discovery shattered his world and left him torn between law and love, justice and mercy. Joseph's reputation in the community was built on his righteousness, his careful adherence to God's law, and his integrity in all his dealings. He was known as a man who could be trusted, whose word was reliable, whose character was above reproach. Now he faced a situation that threatened to compromise everything he had built, everything he believed about right and wrong. The law of Moses was clear about unfaithful betrothed women. Deuteronomy prescribed death by stoning for such offenses, though by Joseph's time, Roman law had complicated the application of Jewish capital punishment. Still, the legal and social consequences were severe. An unfaithful woman could be publicly disgraced, divorced, and left destitute. Her family would share in the shame. Joseph's heart was breaking. He had looked forward to his life with Mary, had prepared their home, had imagined their future together. She was young and beautiful, from a good family, known for her virtue and faith. The discovery of her pregnancy was not just a betrayal of their relationship, but a shattering of his dreams for their shared life. The practical questions tormented him. How could Mary have done this? Who was the father? Had she been forced, or had she chosen to break faith with him? The girl he thought he knew seemed to have become a stranger. The trust that was supposed to be the foundation of their marriage had been destroyed before their wedding day. Yet something in Mary's demeanor puzzled him. She did not act like a woman caught in adultery. There was no shame in her bearing, no pleading for forgiveness, no attempt to deny her condition. She seemed to carry herself with a strange peace, as if she possessed some knowledge that explained everything. What explanation could possibly justify this? Joseph's friends and family would have expected him to take immediate action. A righteous man could not overlook such a violation of their betrothal contract. His own honor was at stake. If he appeared weak or foolish, his reputation would suffer. The community would watch to see how he handled this crisis. The option of public disgrace was available to him. He could call Mary before the authorities, present evidence of her pregnancy, and let the law take its course. This would protect his own reputation and demonstrate his commitment to righteousness. Yet something deep within him recoiled at the thought of exposing Mary to public shame. Perhaps it was love that stayed his hand. Despite everything, Joseph cared for Mary and could not bear the thought of her being humiliated before the entire community. Perhaps it was wisdom. He sensed there was more to this situation than he understood. Or perhaps it was simple mercy, the kind that chooses compassion over strict justice. Joseph decided on a different course. He would divorce Mary quietly, using a private proceeding that would end their betrothal without public spectacle. This would free him from obligation while sparing her the worst consequences of her apparent unfaithfulness. It was a solution that preserved his righteousness while showing mercy to the woman he had hoped to marry. The decision brought no peace. Joseph's nights became sleepless battles with confusion and pain. He loved Mary but could not marry her. He wanted to be merciful but felt bound by law. He trusted his own judgment but could not make sense of what he had seen. The internal conflict wore at him like water wearing away stone. Sleep, when it finally came, brought unexpected relief. In a dream that was more real than waking life, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph with words that would change everything. The divine messenger addressed him formally. "Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take Mary home as your wife." The angel's use of son of David was significant. It reminded Joseph of his royal lineage, his connection to the great king of Israel, and the messianic promises associated with David's descendants. The greeting suggested that Joseph's role in the unfolding drama was more important than he realized. The explanation that followed was staggering. "What is conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. She will give birth to a son, and you are to give him the name Jesus, because he will save his people from their sins." Mary had not been unfaithful. She had been chosen by God for the most extraordinary calling in human history. The angel's words made sense of Mary's strange peace, her lack of shame, her seeming acceptance of her situation. She had not broken faith with Joseph. She had kept faith with God. The child growing within her was not the result of human passion, but of divine power. She was carrying the long-awaited Messiah. Joseph's world shifted completely. His betrothed was not an adulteress, but the most blessed woman who had ever lived. The child was not evidence of betrayal, but the fulfillment of prophecy. His dilemma was not about justice versus mercy, but about faith versus fear. God was asking him to participate in the greatest miracle in human history. The angel's command was clear: take Mary as his wife, protect her and the child, name the boy Jesus. Joseph was being invited to become the earthly father of the Son of God, to provide protection and guidance for the one who would save the world from sin. The calling was both humble and exalted. When Joseph woke from the dream, his confusion was gone. The pieces of the puzzle fell into place with divine clarity. Mary's pregnancy was not a scandal, but a miracle. His role was not to judge, but to protect. His calling was not to understand everything, but to obey faithfully. The decision that had tormented him for days became simple. Joseph chose to trust God's messenger rather than his own understanding. He would take Mary as his wife, raise Jesus as his son, and stand guard over the Holy Family. Love and faith united to overcome law and convention. Joseph's transformation was complete. The man who had planned to divorce Mary quietly now prepared to marry her boldly. He would face the community's questions and whispers with the confidence that comes from knowing God's will. His righteousness would be demonstrated not through adherence to human expectations, but through obedience to divine commands. The carpenter who had worked with wood and stone now found himself chosen to shape the early life of the Word made flesh. His hands that built furniture would also build security for the Savior. His skills that created shelter would shelter the one who would become the world's true refuge. Joseph's dream marked the moment when he joined Mary in the great adventure of faith. Both had received angelic visitations, both had been asked to believe the impossible, both had chosen trust over understanding. Their partnership would be essential for the safety and nurture of the child who would change everything. The road to Bethlehem. As Mary's pregnancy progressed through the months following her return from Elizabeth's house, life in Nazareth had settled into a new rhythm. Joseph had taken her as his wife after his dream, and their quiet wedding had provided some protection from gossip. Still, the curious glances and whispered conversations continued as neighbors calculated months and wondered about the timing of things. Then came the decree that would set in motion the final act of the nativity drama. Caesar Augustus, ruling from his palace in Rome, decided to conduct a census of his vast empire. Every person must return to their ancestral hometown to be registered for taxation purposes. The edict reached even the small villages of Galilee, where Roman authority was felt in every aspect of daily life. For Joseph, the census meant a journey to Bethlehem, the city of David. As a descendant of the great king, his family records were kept there, and Roman efficiency demanded precise registration in the proper location. Under normal circumstances, the 80-mile journey would have been manageable, even routine. But these circumstances were far from normal. Mary was now in the final month of her pregnancy, her body heavy with the child who would be called the Son of the Most High. Travel in her condition would be difficult and potentially dangerous. Yet the Roman decree allowed no exceptions, no delays for personal convenience. The census was empire-wide, and every citizen must comply. The timing seemed cruel from a human perspective. Mary needed rest and familiar surroundings as her delivery approached. She needed the support of other women, the comfort of her mother's house, the security of her own community. Instead, she faced a long journey on foot or donkeyback, sleeping in unfamiliar places, surrounded by crowds of strangers. Joseph must have felt the weight of responsibility heavily. He was charged with protecting both Mary and the unborn Messiah, yet circumstances were forcing them into a situation beyond his control. The carpenter who could build sturdy furniture could not build a road that would spare his wife the rigors of travel. His skills were useless against imperial decree. Preparations for the journey required careful planning. Joseph would need to pack tools for his trade, hoping to find work in Bethlehem to pay for their lodging. Mary would need clothing suitable for travel and delivery, though their resources were limited. Food for the journey, supplies for camping, money for unexpected expenses, all had to be considered. The couple joined the stream of travelers flowing south toward Jerusalem and beyond. The roads were crowded with families making similar journeys, all complying with the census requirement. Dust clouds marked the movement of caravans, while the sound of voices, animals, and wheels created a constant background noise. Mary's discomfort grew with each mile. The gentle swaying motion of riding a donkey, if they had been able to afford one, or the steady rhythm of walking would have been exhausting for a woman so close to giving birth. Joseph watched her with growing concern, knowing that their destination was still days away and that comfortable lodging was uncertain. The landscape changed as they traveled south. The green hills of Galilee gave way to the more arid regions approaching Jerusalem. Olive trees and vineyards dotted the hillsides, while the road itself was worn smooth by centuries of pilgrims, merchants, and armies. Each step brought them closer to the city where prophecy said the Messiah would be born. Other travelers on the road carried their own stories of hardship and hope. Some were excited about seeing family members they hadn't visited in years. Others grumbled about the expense and inconvenience of the journey. Many were simply resigned to the necessity of complying with Roman law, making the best of a difficult situation. Mary and Joseph would have found encouragement in the company of other couples facing similar challenges. The shared experience of pregnancy, travel, and uncertainty created bonds between strangers. Women offered advice and support to Mary, while men shared the burden of protecting their families on the dangerous roads. As they approached Jerusalem, the traffic increased dramatically. The Holy City was a natural stopping point for travelers heading to various destinations in Judea. The sight of the temple rising above the city walls would have stirred religious feelings in every Jewish heart, even as practical concerns about lodging and supplies pressed more immediately. The final stretch to Bethlehem was the most challenging. Mary's labor pains may have already begun, adding urgency to their search for shelter. The small town was overflowing with visitors, all there for the same census registration. Every available room was occupied. Every comfortable space was claimed by those who had arrived earlier. Joseph's anxiety must have been overwhelming as he searched for suitable accommodation for his wife. Mary needed privacy, safety, and assistance for the delivery that was clearly imminent. Yet door after door offered no room, no space, no place for the birth of the Messiah. The irony was profound. The one who would be called the Prince of Peace could find no peaceful place for his birth. The young couple who had begun their journey with hope and determination now faced their darkest hour. Far from home, surrounded by strangers, with no comfortable lodging available, they confronted the reality that their child might be born in the most humble circumstances imaginable. Yet, even in this moment of apparent abandonment, God's plan was unfolding perfectly. The road to Bethlehem had been long and difficult, but it had brought them to the exact place where prophecy said the Messiah must be born. Micah had written centuries earlier that from Bethlehem would come a ruler who would shepherd Israel. The census that seemed like an inconvenient human decree was actually divine orchestration, ensuring that Jesus would be born in David's city. Mary's strength was nearly exhausted, but her faith remained strong. The child moving within her was the promise of God made flesh, and she trusted that the same God who had enabled his conception would provide for his birth. The road had been hard, but the destination was ordained. The journey was ending, but the greatest story ever told was just beginning. The birth of Jesus, a quiet revolution. The small town of Bethlehem bustled with census visitors as evening shadows grew long across the limestone hills. Mary's labor pains were intensifying, and Joseph's search for lodging had become desperate. Door after door revealed the same disappointing news. No room, no space, no place for a woman about to give birth. The town that should have welcomed the Messiah seemed to have no room for him. Finally, one innkeeper took pity on the young couple's obvious distress. While he had no proper room available, he offered them the only shelter he could provide: a cave or stable where animals were kept. It was humble shelter, smelling of hay and livestock, but it offered privacy and protection from the cool night air. Mary and Joseph accepted gratefully, knowing they had no other choice. The stable was a far cry from the comfortable birthing room Mary might have expected in Nazareth, surrounded by her mother and other experienced women. Instead, she had only Joseph's anxious care and the presence of gentle animals who shared their temporary home. Yet in this unlikely setting, the most important birth in human history was about to take place. Luke's account preserves the essential facts with beautiful simplicity. Mary gave birth to her firstborn son, wrapped him in strips of cloth, and laid him in a manger. These few words contain the mystery of the incarnation: God taking on human flesh, the infinite becoming finite, the eternal entering time through the birth canal of a young Jewish woman. The baby who emerged from Mary's womb carried all the hopes and prayers of countless generations. He was the seed of the woman promised to Eve, the son of Abraham, through whom all nations would be blessed, the descendant of David who would rule forever. Yet he appeared to be simply another infant, small and vulnerable, dependent on his mother's care. Mary's first sight of her son must have been overwhelming. This was the child the angel had announced, the one conceived by the Holy Spirit, the Son of the Most High. Yet he was also her baby, warm and real in her arms, needing milk and comfort and protection. The theological wonder and maternal love intertwined in that moment of first meeting. Joseph watched in amazement as the promises he had heard in his dream became reality. The child Mary had carried through months of uncertainty was now breathing and crying in the lamplight of the stable. The carpenter who had learned to shape wood with his hands now witnessed God shaping history through the birth of this infant. The swaddling clothes Mary wrapped around Jesus were simple strips of cloth, the kind used by every Jewish mother to give her newborn security and warmth. Yet these ordinary pieces of fabric were touching the body of the Word made flesh, covering the one through whom all things were created. The commonplace and the cosmic met in those simple wrappings. The manger that served as Jesus' first bed was a feeding trough for animals, carved from stone or built from wood. It was clean and safe, but utterly humble, no place for a king to be born, yet the perfect cradle for the one who would overturn earthly expectations of power and glory. The King of Kings began his earthly life in a servant's place. In choosing such humble circumstances for the incarnation, God made a profound statement about his values. The birth occurred not in a palace, but in a stable, not attended by nobility, but witnessed by working people, not announced first to the powerful, but revealed to simple shepherds. Heaven's priorities differed dramatically from earth's expectations. The quietness of that night was profound. While the Roman Empire celebrated its power and wealth, while religious leaders maintained their careful traditions, while the wealthy enjoyed their comfort, the most significant event in human history unfolded in near silence. Only Mary, Joseph, and the animals witnessed the moment when salvation entered the world. Mary treasured these first moments with her son, storing every detail in her heart. The way he looked, the sound of his cry, the feel of his tiny fingers, all of it would be precious to her as the years unfolded and his destiny became clear. She was not just watching a birth, but witnessing the beginning of redemption. The stable's humble setting emphasized Jesus' identification with the poor and marginalized. He was born among the lowly in conditions that the wealthy would have considered beneath their dignity. From his first breath, Jesus aligned himself with those whom society overlooked, showing that God's kingdom belonged especially to them. The physical reality of the birth was both ordinary and extraordinary. Mary experienced the same pain and effort as every woman giving birth, yet she was delivering the one who would conquer death itself. The biological process was completely natural, while the identity of the child was completely supernatural. Animals present in the stable became silent witnesses to the incarnation. The ox and donkey that would later feature in artistic depictions may not have been specifically mentioned, but their presence in such a setting was natural. These creatures, innocent of human sin, provided gentle companionship for the newborn who would bear the sins of the world. The contrast between the cosmic significance of the birth and its humble setting created beautiful irony. The one who owned all things was born owning nothing. The one who would judge the world was judged fit only for a stable. The one who would be called King of Kings began life with livestock as his court. As Mary held her newborn son, she must have thought of Hannah's song, of Sarah's laughter, of all the mothers in Israel's history who had waited for this moment. Their hopes and prayers were now fulfilled in the tiny form she cradled. Generations of faithful women had prepared the way for this birth through their own faithful acceptance of God's will. Joseph's role in these first moments was protective and practical. He ensured Mary's comfort, watched over their safety, and probably marveled at the perfect humanity of the child he would raise as his own son. The carpenter had become guardian of the cornerstone, protector of the one who would build God's eternal kingdom. The birth of Jesus marked the moment when God's rescue plan for humanity moved from promise to reality. The word that had spoken creation into existence now spoke his first cry as a human infant. The hands that would heal the sick and break bread for the hungry were now small enough to grasp Mary's finger. The feet that would walk on water now kicked helplessly in swaddling clothes. In the quiet of that stable, heaven touched earth so gently that the world barely noticed. Yet nothing would ever be the same. The long night of waiting was over. The light of the world had been born, and though he lay in a feeding trough in a humble stable, his birth was the dawn of a new age, the visit of the Magi and the shadow of Herod. Sometime after Jesus' birth, when the Holy Family had moved from the stable to a house in Bethlehem, mysterious visitors began a journey that would add wonder and danger to the nativity story. Far to the east, in the ancient land of Persia, or perhaps Arabia, wise men called Magi had observed something extraordinary in the heavens, a star unlike any they had seen before. These magi were not kings, despite later traditions, but learned men who studied the movements of celestial bodies. In their time, astronomy and astrology intertwined, and unusual heavenly phenomena were believed to announce significant earthly events. The star they observed convinced them that a great king had been born, one worthy of a long and dangerous journey to find and honor. The Magi prepared for their expedition with the care of experienced travelers. They gathered precious gifts appropriate for royalty: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Each carried deep symbolic meaning: gold for a king, frankincense for divinity, myrrh for mortality. Without knowing it, they were bringing presents that perfectly honored the nature of the child they sought. Their caravan would have been impressive: camels loaded with supplies and treasures, servants to tend the animals and guard against bandits, provisions for months of travel across desert routes. Word of their passage would have spread along the trade roads, creating curiosity about their destination and purpose. The journey took them westward through territories controlled by various rulers, each with their own customs and dangers. Desert crossings tested their endurance, while mountain passes challenged their skill. Yet the star continued to guide them, appearing each night to confirm their direction and strengthen their resolve. When the Magi finally reached Judea, they naturally assumed that a royal birth would be common knowledge in the capital city. Their arrival in Jerusalem created quite a stir as they asked openly, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." The question sent ripples of unease through the city. King Herod the Great, now aging and increasingly paranoid about threats to his throne, was deeply disturbed by reports of these foreign visitors seeking another king. His long reign had been marked by political cunning and ruthless elimination of anyone he perceived as a rival, including members of his own family. Herod summoned the chief priests and teachers of the law, demanding to know where the Messiah was supposed to be born. Their answer came from the prophet Micah. "But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel." The king's response was characteristically crafty. Rather than reveal his murderous intentions, he secretly met with the Magi to learn exactly when the star had appeared. Then he sent them to Bethlehem with false instructions: "Go and search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me, so that I too may go and worship him." The Magi continued their journey to Bethlehem, unaware of the deadly trap being set around them. When they saw the star again, stopping over the place where Jesus was, they were overjoyed. Their long journey was finally reaching its destination. The child they had traveled so far to find was within reach. They found Jesus in a house with Mary, his mother, suggesting that some time had passed since the birth in the stable. The child may have been anywhere from several months to 2 years old, no longer a newborn, but still clearly the one they sought. The humble surroundings might have surprised them, given their expectation of finding royalty. Despite the simple setting, the Magi recognized the significance of their find. They bowed down and worshiped the child, acknowledging his royal and divine nature. Then they opened their treasures and presented their gifts: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. These precious offerings would prove providential for the family's immediate future. Mary watched these exotic visitors honor her son with both wonder and concern. Their obvious wealth and foreign appearance drew attention to her family, while their questions about a newborn king could only increase the dangers she sensed around them. Yet their worship confirmed the angel's words about her son's divine nature. Joseph received the Magi's gifts with gratitude, perhaps sensing that divine providence was providing resources they would soon desperately need. The gold especially would prove crucial for funding an unexpected journey and supporting the family during a time when his carpentry skills would be useless. The Magi's visit transformed Jesus from a local curiosity into an international incident. Word of foreign dignitaries seeking a Jewish king would inevitably reach Herod's ears through his network of spies and informants. The child's safety, already precarious due to his prophetic significance, was now actively threatened by royal paranoia. After their worship and gift-giving, the Magi prepared to return to Herod as they had promised. But God intervened through a dream, warning them not to go back to the murderous king. Like the other dreams that had guided this story, Mary's angelic visitation, Joseph's reassuring vision, divine revelation redirected human plans to serve heaven's purposes. The wise men took a different route home, avoiding Jerusalem entirely. Their departure left Herod waiting for information that would never come, while their disobedience protected not only themselves but also the Holy Family from immediate discovery. Their refusal to cooperate with evil became part of God's protective plan. The visit of the Magi marked the first recognition of Jesus by the Gentile world. These foreign scholars had traveled farther and sacrificed more to worship the newborn king than many of his own people would ever do. Their journey foreshadowed the global reach of the gospel message and the inclusion of all nations in God's salvation plan. Their gifts, meanwhile, provided practical help for the challenges ahead. The gold would fund an escape to Egypt. The frankincense and myrrh could be sold for ongoing support. God's provision came through unexpected channels, as it often does, using the devotion of foreign visitors to meet the needs of his holy family. As the Magi disappeared into the distance, traveling by roads that would keep them far from Herod's reach, they left behind a child whose life was now marked for destruction by earthly power. But they also left behind gifts that would enable his survival and parents who had received fresh confirmation of his divine calling. The shadow of Herod's rage was already falling across Bethlehem, but the light of the world had been properly honored by those who had eyes to see. The contrast between the Magi's worship and Herod's wrath perfectly illustrated the choice that Jesus' presence would always present to the world: humble adoration or violent rejection, but never indifference. Escape to Egypt. Darkness cloaked Bethlehem as Mary stirred from restless sleep. Joseph's urgent whisper pierced the silence. An angel had spoken to him in dreams, warning of danger that crept closer with each passing hour. King Herod's soldiers would soon arrive, seeking the child prophets called the newborn king. Mary gathered their few belongings with trembling hands. The baby Jesus slept peacefully in her arms, unaware that his very existence threatened a throne. She wrapped him tighter against the cool night air, her heart racing with fear and confusion. How could this innocent child pose any threat to anyone? The journey to Egypt began under starlight. Joseph led their donkey along dusty paths, constantly glancing over his shoulder. Mary cradled Jesus, whispering soft prayers into the darkness. Each step took them further from everything familiar, deeper into the unknown wilderness that stretched toward a foreign land. Days blended into weeks as they traveled south. The landscape gradually changed from the rolling hills of Judea to harsh desert terrain. Water became precious, food grew scarce. Mary's body still ached from childbirth, yet she endured each mile without complaint. Her son's safety mattered more than her own comfort. They joined caravans of traders when possible, finding safety in numbers. Mary listened to conversations in languages she didn't understand, watching foreign customs with curious eyes. Egypt loomed ahead like a distant promise, a place where Roman authority might protect them from Herod's reach. The crossing into Egyptian territory brought both relief and sorrow. They were safe now, but also exiles. Mary looked back toward the land of her ancestors, wondering when she might see it again. The weight of prophecy pressed down on her shoulders. Her son was destined for greatness, but the path seemed paved with suffering. Alexandria welcomed them with its bustling markets and diverse population. Jewish communities had thrived here for generations, creating pockets of familiar culture within Egyptian society. Mary found comfort among women who understood her faith, even as she kept the full truth of Jesus' identity hidden in her heart. Life in exile settled into routine. Joseph found work with his hands, crafting furniture and tools that Egyptian customers valued. Mary tended to Jesus, watching him grow from infant to toddler in foreign soil. She taught him Hebrew words and sang him songs from their homeland, keeping their heritage alive in this strange place. News from Palestine arrived through traveling merchants and pilgrims. Word of Herod's massacre in Bethlehem reached them like a physical blow. Mary wept for the mothers who had lost their children, knowing that her son's life had been purchased with their suffering. Guilt mixed with gratitude in her prayers each night. Jesus began to walk and speak during their Egyptian sojourn. Mary marveled at his quick mind and gentle spirit, wondering what divine nature might be stirring within this ordinary seeming child. He played with other children, learned Egyptian words, and adapted to their new home with the flexibility of youth. Years passed in this suspended existence. Mary aged from girl to woman while caring for her son in a land that never quite felt like home. She dreamed of Nazareth's familiar streets and her mother's embrace. Yet she also grew stronger in faith, learning to trust God's plan even when it led through paths of hardship. The angel's message came to Joseph again in dreams, just as clearly as before. Herod was dead. The immediate danger had passed. They could return to Palestine safely. Mary felt joy and trepidation in equal measure. Egypt had become familiar, almost comfortable. The journey home would mean facing an uncertain future once again. They packed their belongings with the same care they had used when fleeing. But this time, hope traveled with them instead of fear. Jesus was older now, able to walk beside the donkey for short distances. He chattered excitedly about the journey, unaware of the significance this return held for his parents. The road back to Palestine retraced their earlier steps. Mary recognized landmarks that had been obscured by darkness and fear during their escape. Now she saw them clearly, markers of God's protection throughout their time of trial. Her faith had deepened in the desert, strengthened by adversity. As they crossed back into Jewish territory, Mary felt the weight of home settling around her like a comfortable cloak. The language, the customs, the familiar rhythms of life here spoke to something deep in her soul. Yet she carried memories of Egypt with her, experiences that had broadened her understanding of God's vast world. The years in exile had changed them all. Joseph walked with more confidence, seasoned by hardship and divine guidance. Jesus had grown into a bright, curious child who had already seen more of the world than most adults. And Mary had learned that following God's will sometimes meant leaving everything behind, trusting that love would light the path forward. Return to Nazareth, years in obscurity. The hills of Galilee welcomed them home with gentle slopes and familiar stones. Nazareth appeared before them like a gift unwrapped after long absence. Mary's heart quickened as she recognized the narrow streets where she had played as a child. Yet everything seemed smaller somehow, as if her time in Egypt had expanded her vision of the world. Their old house stood empty, weathered by years of neglect. Joseph set to work immediately, repairing what time and weather had damaged. Mary swept away dust and cobwebs, slowly transforming the spac into a home. Jesus explored each room with wonder, claiming this new territory as his own. Neighbors emerged cautiously at first, uncertain about the family that had vanished so mysteriously years before. Mary offered simple explanations about their time away, sharing just enough truth to satisfy curiosity without revealing the deeper story. Gradually, acceptance replaced suspicion as the community remembered their affection for Joseph's steady character and Mary's gentle ways. Life in Nazareth resumed its quiet rhythm. Joseph reopened his workshop, rebuilding relationships with customers who had missed his skilled craftsmanship. The familiar sounds of hammer and saw filled their days, creating a soundtrack of normal life that Mary had almost forgotten during their exile years. Jesus began to play with local children, though Mary noticed how he often stood apart, watching their games with thoughtful eyes before joining in. He learned quickly whether the subject was childhood games or the more serious business of Jewish customs and traditions. His questions often surprised adults with their depth and an insight. The synagogue became central to their family life once again. Mary listened as Jesus recited Hebrew prayers with growing confidence, his young voice blending with older men who had known these words since their own childhood. She saw how intently he absorbed the readings from Torah and prophets, filing away wisdom that seemed to resonate in his spirit. Daily routines brought comfort after years of uncertainty. Mary rose before dawn to prepare bread, her hands remembering skills that distance had not erased. She drew water from the village well, joining other women in conversations that wove together the fabric of community life. These ordinary moments felt precious after their time as strangers in a foreign land. Joseph taught Jesus the carpenter's trade, showing him how to choose good wood and handle tools with respect. The boy's hands, though small, showed natural skill and patience. Mary watched from doorways as father and son worked together, their heads bent over shared projects that would serve their neighbors' needs. Seasons passed in predictable cycles. Spring brought wildflowers to Galilean hillsides where Jesus loved to wander. Summer's heat sent families seeking shade in cool houses during midday hours. Autumn harvests filled storage rooms with grain and oil for winter months. Winter rains drummed against roofs while families gathered close around small fires. Mary treasured these peaceful years, storing up memories like precious jewels. She knew somehow that this quiet time was preparation for something greater. The angel's words echoed in her memory during ordinary moments, reminding her that her son's destiny lay beyond carpentry and village life. Jesus grew taller and stronger, his child's body stretching toward the man he would become. Mary saw glimpses of divine wisdom in his eyes, flashes of understanding that seemed too deep for his years. Yet he remained thoroughly human too, laughing at silly jokes and crying when he scraped his knees. Religious festivals brought the family to Jerusalem, joining throngs of pilgrims who converged on the holy city from across Palestine. Mary watched Jesus' face during these journeys, seeing how the temple's magnificence stirred something profound in his spirit. He asked fewer questions during these visits, as if absorbing rather than seeking information. The learning never stopped. Jesus mastered Scripture with remarkable ease, discussing complex theological concepts with rabbis who were impressed by his insights. Yet he also learned practical skills from Joseph, becoming accomplished with tools and wood. Mary marveled at how he balanced spiritual and earthly knowledge with such natural grace. Village life brought its share of sorrows, alongside joys. Mary comforted neighbors through illnesses and losses, offering the quiet strength she had developed during her own trials. Jesus often accompanied her on these mercy visits, his presence somehow bringing peace to troubled homes. Years accumulated like layers of sediment, each one adding depth to their family's story, while keeping the surface appearance remarkably ordinary. Neighbors saw a carpenter's family living quiet, devout lives. Only Mary and Joseph knew they were raising the promised Messiah in humble disguise. The child grew in wisdom and stature, finding favor with God and people, just as Scripture would later record. Mary watched this growth with wonder and increasing awareness that their time of obscurity was slowly drawing toward its close. Change approached like morning light, creeping across eastern hills, inevitable and transformative. These hidden years shaped Jesus in ways that grand palaces and royal tutors never could have accomplished. He learned compassion by witnessing his neighbors' struggles. He understood hard work through calloused hands and aching muscles. He grasped human nature by living fully within it, sharing both its limitations and its possibilities. Mary treasured all these things in her heart, just as she had treasured the shepherds' testimony and the angels' songs years before in Bethlehem. Each ordinary day added another thread to the tapestry of preparation that God was weaving around his son. Soon enough, the hidden years would end, and Jesus would step into the light of public ministry. The boy in the temple. Jerusalem blazed with festival excitement as Passover crowds filled every street and courtyard. Mary walked beside Joseph, following the familiar rhythm of pilgrimage that had marked their family's spring journeys for years. Jesus, now 12 years old, moved with confident steps among relatives and neighbors who formed their traveling group. The city's ancient stones seemed to pulse with history during these holy days. Mary felt the weight of centuries pressing down from temple walls, reminding all who entered of God's enduring covenant with his people. Jesus walked quietly beside her, his eyes taking in sights that never failed to stir something deep within his spirit. Passover preparations consumed their days. Mary helped prepare the ritual meal, grinding herbs and setting aside unleavened bread according to traditions passed down through generations. Jesus assisted where he could, his hands learning the sacred rhythms even as his mind absorbed their deeper meanings. The temple drew him like a magnet draws iron. Mary noticed how he lingered during their ritual visits, his attention fixed on priests performing ancient ceremonies. His questions grew more thoughtful, less like a child seeking information and more like a scholar probing for understanding. Festival week passed in a blur of worship, family gatherings, and ceremonial meals. Mary felt the familiar satisfaction that came from fulfilling religious obligations, from participating in traditions that connected her family to their ancestors and their God. Soon they would return to Nazareth, carrying renewed spiritual strength for another year. The journey home began with the usual chaos of departure. Large traveling groups required time to organize, with families gathering belongings and saying farewell to relatives who lived in different regions. Mary assumed Jesus was somewhere among their kinsmen, perhaps walking with cousins or listening to uncles share stories along the dusty road. Hours passed before concern crept into her consciousness. She hadn't seen Jesus since morning, though she hadn't worried because their traveling party included many relatives who might have invited him to walk alongside them. But as afternoon shadows lengthened, she realized she couldn't remember anyone mentioning his presence. Panic struck like lightning when systematic searching revealed the truth. Jesus was nowhere among their traveling companions. No one had seen him since they left Jerusalem. The group had traveled a full day's journey while assuming someone else was watching her son. Mary's heart hammered against her ribs as the terrible reality settled over her. Joseph's face went pale as they realized what had happened. They would have to return to Jerusalem immediately, leaving their traveling group to continue homeward. The thought of their 12-year-old son alone in the crowded, potentially dangerous city filled them both with dread that threatened to overwhelm rational thought. The journey back to Jerusalem felt endless despite their urgent pace. Mary's mind raced through terrible possibilities. Jesus could be lost, injured, kidnapped, or worse. The city's narrow streets and countless hiding places could swallow a child completely. Her prayers became desperate pleas as each mile stretched before them like an eternity. Night fell before they reached the city gates. Mary spent sleepless hours imagining Jesus frightened and alone, calling for parents who had unknowingly abandoned him. The guilt crushed down on her like stones. How could she have been so careless with the child God had entrusted to her care? Dawn brought renewed searching through Jerusalem's maze of streets and markets. They questioned merchants, beggars, anyone who might have noticed a lost boy. Mary's voice grew hoarse from calling Jesus' name. Her feet bled from rushing across rough cobblestones. Still, they found no trace of him. 2 days passed in agony. Mary barely ate or slept, driven by desperation that gave her strength beyond her natural limits. Joseph searched with equal determination, his carpenter's practical mind systematically covering ground, while his father's heart broke with each failed inquiry. The third day brought them to the temple courts, where Mary had almost lost hope of finding Jesus alive and unharmed. But voices drew their attention toward a group gathered around several learned teachers. In the center sat a young boy, listening intently and asking questions that made the grown men nod with appreciation. Jesus, alive, safe, completely absorbed in theological discussion as if nothing unusual had happened. Mary felt relief and anger crash together in her chest like opposing waves. She wanted to embrace him and scold him simultaneously. How could he seem so calm when they had suffered such anguish? The teachers looked up as Mary and Joseph approached, their faces showing surprise at the interruption. Jesus turned toward his parents with an expression of mild confusion, as if he couldn't understand their obvious distress. The gulf between his calm demeanor and their frantic worry seemed impossible to bridge. Mary's words came out in a rush of emotion and exhaustion. Why had he treated them this way? Didn't he realize they had been searching desperately, fearing the worst? His father and she had been sick with worry, turning Jerusalem upside down looking for him. Jesus' response struck her like a physical blow. Why had they searched for him at all? Didn't they know he must be in his father's house about his father's business? The words carried layers of meaning that Mary couldn't fully grasp, though she sensed they revealed something profound about her son's growing understanding of his identity. The teachers watched this family drama with respectful silence, clearly impressed by the boy's wisdom, but sensitive to the parents' relief and confusion. Jesus rose obediently when Joseph indicated it was time to leave, but Mary saw in his eyes a glimpse of something vast and mysterious that she didn't yet comprehend. They left the temple courts together, but Mary felt as if they were taking home a stranger wearing her son's familiar face. The child who had discussed complex theology with learned men seemed different from the boy who had helped Joseph in his workshop just weeks before. The journey back to Nazareth passed in contemplative silence. Jesus walked between his parents without complaint, but Mary sensed his thoughts were still partly in that temple courtyard, wrestling with questions and insights that belonged to a world beyond childhood's boundaries. That night, as they camped with fellow travelers returning north, Mary lay awake staring at stars while Jesus slept peacefully beside her. The angel's words from years ago echoed in her memory, reminding her that this child's destiny extended far beyond ordinary family life. Today had offered a glimpse of that greater calling. She stored these events in her heart alongside all the other mysterious moments that marked Jesus' life. Someday, perhaps, their meaning would become clear. For now, she could only watch and wonder as her son grew toward a future that remained hidden in God's perfect timing. The silent years. A mother's watchful eye. Morning light filtered through wooden shutters as Mary stirred grain into porridge, her hands moving with the practiced rhythm of countless dawns. Jesus sat nearby, already dressed and alert despite the early hour. At 17, he had grown tall and strong, his shoulders broadening with the physical work that filled his days alongside Joseph. These quiet years had become precious to Mary, though she sensed their number was limited. Jesus moved through daily routines with increasing thoughtfulness, as if each ordinary task carried deeper meaning than others might perceive. She watched him carefully, noting subtle changes that marked his passage from boyhood toward manhood. The carpenter's shop drew him like a second home. Jesus had mastered every tool under Joseph's patient instruction, his hands crafting furniture and implements that neighbors praised for their quality and durability. Yet Mary noticed how he often paused in his work, staring toward distant hills with eyes that seemed to see beyond present horizons. Scripture study consumed his evening hours. Jesus read Torah and prophets with intensity that impressed even learned rabbis who occasionally visited their synagogue. His questions during these visits revealed understanding that went far beyond his years, though he asked them with humility that prevented any appearance of showing off. Village life continued its predictable patterns around them. Mary participated in women's gatherings, sharing news and concerns while her hands worked at spinning or weaving. She listened to complaints about taxes, weather, and family troubles, offering comfort where she could, while keeping her own profound secrets locked safely in her heart. Jesus helped wherever help was needed. He assisted elderly neighbors with repairs they couldn't manage alone. He carried water for women whose strength had failed. He played with small children who followed him around the village, drawn by his gentle nature and endless patience with their games and questions. Mary marveled at how completely he had learned to be human while somehow remaining fully divine. The mystery of his dual nature revealed itself in small moments rather than dramatic signs. He felt hunger, fatigue, and physical pain just like anyone else. Yet something in his presence brought peace to troubled souls and hope to discouraged hearts. Religious festivals still drew their family to Jerusalem, though these journeys had taken on different meanings since Jesus' temple incident years earlier. Mary watched him during worship services, seeing how he absorbed every word and gesture with profound reverence. He seemed to be preparing for something, though what remained unclear. The wilderness called to him with increasing frequency. Jesus took long walks in lonely places, returning home with dust on his sandals and depth in his eyes that spoke of communion with the divine. Mary never questioned these solitary journeys, sensing they were necessary for reasons she couldn't fully understand. Young men his age were beginning to marry and establish their own households. Mary noticed how village girls watched Jesus with interest, though he seemed unaware of their attention. His focus remained fixed on spiritual matters and family responsibilities, showing no inclination toward romantic attachments that occupied most young men's thoughts. Joseph's health began to decline as years accumulated, though he bore increasing limitations with characteristic patience. Jesus took on more workshop responsibilities without complaint, shouldering burdens that would have challenged men twice his age. Mary saw how naturally he assumed leadership, though he never asserted authority in ways that diminished Joseph's dignity. News from the outside world filtered into Nazareth through travelers and merchants. Roman taxation grew heavier. Political tensions simmered throughout Palestine. Religious leaders in Jerusalem debated interpretations of law and prophecy with increasing fervor. Jesus listened to these reports with careful attention, though he rarely offered opinions. Mary's own understanding deepened during these hidden years. Prayer became her constant companion as she sought wisdom for raising a son whose destiny exceeded anything Scripture had prepared her to expect. She found strength in silence, learning to trust God's timing even when questions multiplied faster than answers. The boy was becoming a man, but what kind of man remained to be seen? Mary detected growing restlessness in Jesus' spirit, as if he sensed the approach of some great change. He fulfilled daily obligations with unwavering faithfulness, yet she felt him poised on the edge of transformation that would reshape everything. Dreams visited her sometimes, echoes of angelic announcements that had marked Jesus' beginning. These nocturnal visions carried no specific messages, only gentle reminders that God's plan continued to unfold according to divine schedule. Mary woke from such dreams with renewed commitment to patient watchfulness. Community responsibilities multiplied as Jesus matured. He mediated disputes between neighbors with wisdom that amazed older men. He organized assistance for families facing hardship. He taught younger boys carpentry skills with the same patient thoroughness Joseph had shown him. Leadership emerged naturally from his character rather than from ambition. The learning never ceased. Jesus studied with visiting scholars when opportunity arose, engaging in discussions that often continued long into night hours. Mary served simple meals to these learned men, listening as her son explored questions about law, prophecy, and God's relationship with his people. Physical strength reached its peak during these years. Jesus could work longer hours than men decades his senior, yet he remained gentle with those whose abilities were limited by age or illness. Power and humility blended seamlessly in his character, creating combinations that seemed impossible yet were undeniably real. Mary treasured these final years of relative normalcy, knowing instinctively that dramatic change approached like storm clouds gathering on distant horizons. Soon, very soon, her son would step beyond the familiar boundaries of village life into a larger world that waited for his coming. Until then, she watched and wondered and prayed, storing up memories against the uncertain future that beckoned from beyond tomorrow's dawn. The wedding at Cana, Mary the catalyst. Spring had dressed Galilee in wedding finery when the invitation arrived from Cana. Mary felt genuine joy at the prospect of celebration after months of routine village life. Jesus, now 30 years old, agreed to accompany her to the festivities, though she noticed how he seemed to weigh even simple decisions more carefully these days. The journey to Cana took them through countryside bursting with new life. Wildflowers carpeted hillsides in brilliant colors while fresh green leaves unfurled on every tree. Mary walked beside Jesus, enjoying rare time for unhurried conversation as they covered the familiar miles between villages. Wedding preparations had transformed Cana into a festival ground. Garlands draped between houses while musicians tuned instruments for days of celebration ahead. Mary smiled at the infectious joy that surrounded young couples beginning their life together. These occasions reminded her of humanity's capacity for hope despite life's inevitable hardships. The ceremony itself followed ancient traditions that connected this couple to countless generations who had spoken similar vows under similar skies. Mary watched the bride's radiant face and remembered her own wedding to Joseph, though that seemed like memories from another lifetime now. So much had changed since those early days of marriage. Jesus participated in the celebration with quiet grace, though she noticed how he often stood slightly apart from the crowd, observing rather than fully engaging. His presence brought calm to the festive atmosphere without dampening anyone's spirits. People seemed drawn to him without understanding exactly why. The feast began with abundant food and wine flowing freely among guests who had traveled from neighboring villages to honor the new couple. Mary enjoyed conversations with old friends she rarely saw, catching up on family news and sharing stories that wove their lives together despite geographical distances. Hours passed in pleasant celebration until Mary became aware of worried whispers among the servants. She listened carefully and realized their concern. The wine was running dangerously low. For a wedding feast to run out of wine would bring shame on both families that could last for years. The celebration's joy threatened to transform into humiliation. Mary felt the familiar stirring in her spirit that had preceded so many significant moments throughout her life. She looked toward Jesus, seeing him standing near the edge of the courtyard with that thoughtful expression that meant he was wrestling with something important. Somehow she knew this moment had arrived for reasons beyond coincidence. She approached her son quietly, speaking words that would echo through history. "They have no wine." Simple words that carried layers of meaning she couldn't fully articulate. She sensed this crisis offered an opportunity for something greater than solving a social embarrassment, though what that might be remained unclear. Jesus' response surprised her with its apparent distance. "Woman, what does this have to do with me? My hour has not yet come." The formal address stung slightly, though she recognized it carried respect rather than disrespect. More puzzling was his reference to an hour that had not yet arrived. What hour? What timing was he measuring? Yet something in his eyes told her differently than his words suggested. Mary had learned to read her son's expressions over 30 years of motherhood. Behind his seeming reluctance, she detected readiness, even anticipation. Perhaps the hour he mentioned was closer than his words implied. Without fully understanding her own certainty, Mary turned to the servants who were standing nearby, clearly distressed about their wine shortage. Her instructions were simple, yet profound. "Whatever he tells you, do it." The words came from faith rather than knowledge, trust rather than understanding. 6 stone water jars stood near the entrance, used for ceremonial washing according to Jewish custom. Each jar could hold 20 or 30 gallons, massive containers that would require significant effort to fill. Jesus gestured toward them, his voice carrying quiet authority that made servants respond without question. "Fill the jars with water," he instructed. The servants exchanged uncertain glances, but began the laborious task of drawing water and pouring it into the enormous containers. Mary watched this process with growing anticipation, though she had no idea what Jesus intended to accomplish with all this water. When the jars were filled to their brims, Jesus spoke again. "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the feast." Mary held her breath as a servant filled a cup from one of the water jars and carried it toward the man responsible for overseeing the wedding celebration. The master of the feast lifted the cup to his lips, his expression transforming from duty to surprise to absolute delight. He immediately called for the bridegroom, his voice carrying excitement that made nearby guests turn their attention toward the conversation. Mary couldn't hear the master's exact words, but his gestures and tone communicated amazement. He was praising the quality of whatever he had just tasted, apparently astonished that such excellent refreshment had been saved for so late in the celebration. Other guests began to gather, curious about what had caused such enthusiasm. Word spread quickly through the crowd that somehow, miraculously, the finest wine anyone had ever tasted was now flowing abundantly from containers that had held only water moments before. Mary watched Jesus as realization dawned on guests around them. His first miracle had been performed quietly, without fanfare or announcement. The transformation was complete and undeniable. Water had become wine, but not just any wine. This was superior to anything served earlier, rich and full-bodied in ways that made even experienced wedding guests marvel at its quality. The celebration's threatened disaster had become its greatest triumph. Jesus retreated from the growing excitement, but Mary saw how several of his disciples looked at him with new understanding. They had witnessed something that confirmed their growing conviction about his identity. What had begun as a social favor had become a revelation of divine power. Mary treasured this moment as she had treasured so many others throughout Jesus' life. She had played a role in prompting his first public miracle, though she hadn't fully understood what she was requesting. Her simple faith in her son's abilities had opened a door that would never close again. The wedding celebration continued with renewed vigor, fueled by wine that seemed to improve rather than diminish as the evening progressed. But Mary knew something fundamental had changed. Jesus had stepped across an invisible threshold from private preparation into public ministry. The hidden years were ending, and the world would never be the same. Mary, during the rise of Jesus' ministry, word traveled faster than Jesus himself, as reports of his teachings and miracles spread throughout Galilee, like ripples from a stone dropped in still water. Mary heard fragments of these stories from neighbors, merchants, and pilgrims who passed through Nazareth with tales that both thrilled and troubled her maternal heart. Her son had gathered followers, men who had left their fishing nets and tax tables to walk the dusty roads behind a carpenter from their own village. Mary struggled to reconcile these reports with memories of the boy who had helped Joseph plane boards and fit joints with patient precision. Yet she had always known this day would come. The synagogue in Nazareth buzzed with conflicting opinions about Jesus' growing reputation. Some neighbors felt proud that their village had produced such a remarkable teacher. Others muttered about presumption and wondered aloud how Joseph's son dared to speak with authority that challenged established religious leaders. Mary listened to both praise and criticism with careful silence. Crowds began seeking Jesus wherever he went, drawn by healing power that restored sight to blind eyes and strength to withered limbs. Mary marveled at these reports while remembering the gentle hands that had once helped her knead bread and tend their small garden. Those same hands now channeled divine power that transformed broken lives. His teachings drew even larger crowds than his miracles. People walked for days just to hear Jesus speak about God's kingdom in ways that made ancient truths feel fresh and relevant. Mary wished she could hear these teachings herself, though she understood why he rarely returned to Nazareth. Prophets found little honor in their own country, as he had discovered during one particularly painful homecoming. The disciples became like a second family to Jesus, sharing his travels and absorbing his teachings with devotion that reminded Mary of her own relationship with God's calling. She felt gratitude toward these men who provided her son with companionship and support during his demanding ministry. Yet she also felt the natural jealousy of a mother who must share her child with the world. Reports of opposition began mixing with stories of success. Religious authorities in Jerusalem were taking notice of Jesus' growing influence, and their attention was not entirely friendly. Mary's maternal instincts quickened with worry as she realized her son was making enemies among powerful people who could cause serious trouble. Pilgrims returning from Jerusalem brought disturbing news of increasing tension between Jesus and the established religious hierarchy. Pharisees and scribes were beginning to challenge his teachings publicly, setting traps designed to discredit him before the crowds. Mary remembered prophecies about suffering and wondered if these conflicts were early signs of sorrows yet to come. The demands of ministry left little time for family visits. Jesus moved constantly throughout Galilee, teaching in synagogues, healing in marketplaces, and sharing meals with crowds that gathered wherever he appeared. Mary understood his dedication to this calling, yet her heart ached for the simple conversations they had once shared around their family table. Stories reached her of Jesus dining with tax collectors and sinners, choices that scandalized religious leaders but revealed his heart for outcasts and broken people. Mary felt proud of her son's compassion, even as she worried about the religious establishment's growing hostility toward his unconventional ministry methods. The miracles multiplied beyond anything anyone had expected, feeding thousands with a few loaves and fish, calming storms with spoken words, raising the dead back to life. Mary struggled to reconcile these supernatural displays with memories of the human child she had nursed and taught and loved through ordinary days in Nazareth. His parables became famous throughout Palestine, simple stories that revealed profound spiritual truths to those who had ears to hear. Mary recognized her son's wisdom in these teachings, remembering conversations that had hinted at the depth of understanding he now shared with crowds of eager listeners. The religious establishment's opposition intensified as Jesus' popularity grew. Reports reached Mary of plots and schemes designed to trap him in controversial statements or compromising situations. She prayed constantly for his safety, knowing that his ministry had made him a target for those who felt threatened by his message. John the Baptist's arrest and execution sent shockwaves throughout Palestine, reminding everyone that challenging religious and political authority carried deadly risks. Mary's anxiety deepened as she realized Jesus' message was even more radical than John's had been. If Herod could execute the Baptist, what might he do to her son? The crowds continued to grow, sometimes numbering in the thousands as people traveled from across Palestine to see and hear Jesus. Mary felt wonder at God's power working through her son, yet she also felt increasing concern about the logistics and dangers of managing such large gatherings in a politically unstable environment. Letters and messages from the disciples occasionally brought news directly from Jesus' traveling company. Mary treasured these communications, learning about her son's daily life and ministry from men who shared his struggles and witnessed his power. Their devotion to him reassured her that he was surrounded by people who would protect him when possible. The transformation was complete and irreversible. Her carpenter's son had become Palestine's most famous teacher and miracle worker. Mary watched from a distance as Jesus fulfilled the destiny that angels had announced before his birth. Yet with each passing day, she sensed they were moving towards some great crisis that would test everyone's faith to its breaking point. The ministry continued its relentless pace, carrying Jesus further from the quiet life they had once shared and closer to a confrontation with powers that would not tolerate his challenge to their authority much longer. Mary could only watch and pray as events moved toward their inevitable climax. Moments of distance, the growing divide. Something changed between mother and son. The boy who once sat beside her spinning wool had become a man drawing thousands. Where Mary once knew his every thought, now Jesus spoke in riddles that left even his closest followers puzzled. The gentle child who helped Joseph in the workshop now overturned tables in the temple. Her heart ached with a loneliness she had never expected. The crowds pressed in everywhere Jesus went. Desperate hands reached toward him. Voices called his name from dawn until dusk. Mary watched from the edges, no longer the center of his world. She remembered when his biggest concern was whether the bread would rise properly. Now kingdoms seemed to hang on his words. One afternoon, word came that Jesus was teaching nearby. Mary gathered her other sons and daughters, hoping for a quiet moment with her firstborn. They walked through dusty streets toward the house where he stayed. The building overflowed with people. Bodies packed every doorway. Voices spilled into the courtyard. A messenger squeezed through the crowd toward Jesus. "Your mother and brothers are outside, wanting to speak with you." Mary's heart lifted. Surely he would pause his teaching. Surely he would come as he always had. But Jesus looked up at the faces surrounding him, his expression distant and serene. "Who is my mother? Who are my brothers?" he asked the crowd. His voice carried clearly through the still air. "Whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my brother and sister and mother." The words struck Mary like stones. She felt her other children stiffen beside her. Heat rose in her cheeks. The crowd murmured their approval of Jesus' wisdom. But Mary stepped backward into the street, her chest tight with something between hurt and understanding. She had carried him beneath her heart for 9 months. She had nursed him through fevers. She had watched him take his first steps in their small home in Nazareth. Yet now he spoke as if family bonds were nothing compared to spiritual ones, as if 30 years of love meant less than a moment of faith. Walking home in silence, Mary's mind churned. She remembered the angel's words so long ago. She recalled Simeon's prophecy about a sword piercing her soul. Perhaps this distance was part of the plan she had agreed to before she truly understood what it would cost. Jesus continued preaching throughout Galilee. Stories reached Mary of his growing boldness. He healed on the Sabbath, knowing it would anger the religious leaders. He ate with tax collectors and sinners, ignoring social customs. He spoke of himself in ways that made the Pharisees grind their teeth with rage. Mary worried about his safety. She worried about his growing isolation from everything normal and human. Most of all, she worried about the look in his eyes when she saw him, a distance that seemed to stretch beyond the physical space between them. Sometimes Jesus would visit Nazareth, but even then, he felt like a stranger. The neighbors whispered about his radical teachings. They remembered him as the carpenter's son who had played with their children. Now he spoke with an authority that made them uncomfortable. "Isn't this Mary's boy?" they asked each other. "Where did he get such wisdom? Who does he think he is?" Their skepticism wounded Mary more than she let on. She watched Jesus struggle with their rejection. "A prophet had no honor in his hometown," he said sadly. Even his own family found it hard to believe the magnitude of what was happening. Mary began to understand that loving Jesus meant letting him go completely. She had released him to God's will years ago, but she had not expected that will to take him so far from her reach. The mother's heart in her wanted to protect him, to warn him about the dangers ahead. The believer in her recognized that he walked a path she could not follow. Late at night, Mary would lie awake, remembering simpler times. Jesus as a toddler clinging to her robes. Jesus at 12 surprising the teachers with his questions. Jesus as a young man, strong and helpful and still hers in all the ways that mattered. Now he belonged to the world. His love had expanded beyond what any single person could contain. Mary felt proud and bereft at the same time. She had raised the Messiah, but lost her son in the process. The distance between them was not cruelty, it was necessity. Jesus was becoming who he was meant to be, and that person could not remain tied to earthly relationships in the old way. Mary sensed the sacrifice required of both of them. She would learn to love him differently, not as her child, but as her Lord. The road to Jerusalem. Clouds gather. Spring arrived in Galilee with wildflowers and fresh hope, but Mary felt winter settling in her bones. Something had shifted in Jesus' teachings. His parables grew darker, filled with warnings about judgment and separation. The religious leaders' hostility sharpened like blades being honed. Mary watched storm clouds gathering on every horizon. Jesus spoke more frequently about his death, not in whispers or private moments, but openly to his disciples. He told them he would suffer at the hands of the elders and chief priests. He said he would be killed and rise again on the third day. The apostles argued with him, refusing to believe such talk. Mary believed every word. She had pondered too many mysteries in her heart to doubt him now. The angel's message decades ago had prepared her for this moment, though she had not understood it then. Her son would save his people, but the salvation would come through suffering. News traveled quickly in the small villages around the Sea of Galilee. Mary heard reports of Jesus' growing boldness. He had raised Lazarus from the dead in Bethany, just outside Jerusalem. The miracle drew enormous crowds, but it also sealed his fate with the religious authorities. They could no longer ignore or dismiss him. The Pharisees and Sadducees began plotting in earnest. Mary learned of their schemes through whispered conversations in the marketplace. Some wanted Jesus arrested quietly. Others preferred to discredit him publicly. All agreed he posed a threat to their power and position. Jesus seemed to court danger deliberately. He spoke more plainly about being the Son of God. He claimed authority to forgive sins. He challenged the temple system that enriched the priests. Every word pushed his enemies closer to action. Mary watched from afar as Jesus' ministry intensified. Crowds followed him everywhere, but she noticed how many of his followers were poor, desperate, or outcasts. The powerful remained suspicious or hostile. This pattern troubled her maternal heart, even as it fulfilled ancient prophecies. The time of Passover approached, and Jesus made his intentions clear. He would go to Jerusalem for the feast. His disciples tried to dissuade him, knowing the dangers waiting in the holy city. But Jesus set his face toward Jerusalem like flint, determined to fulfill what was written about him. Mary made her own preparations for the journey. She could not stay away, knowing what awaited her son. Other mothers might have tried to prevent him from going. They might have pleaded or demanded he reconsider. But Mary had learned long ago that her role was not to obstruct God's plan, but to trust it completely. The road from Galilee to Jerusalem filled with pilgrims during Passover season. Families traveled together, singing psalms and sharing stories. Children ran between the donkeys and camels. The atmosphere should have been joyful and festive. But Mary walked in the shadow of coming events. She saw Jesus ahead of her on the road, surrounded by his 12 disciples. They did not understand what awaited them in Jerusalem. Their conversations revealed hopes for earthly glory and political revolution. Jesus had tried to prepare them, but they could not grasp the reality of his mission. As the walls of Jerusalem came into view, Mary's steps grew heavier. The city sprawled across its hills. magnificent and terrible in the afternoon sun. The temple gleamed like gold, but Mary knew it would soon witness scenes of unimaginable sorrow. Jesus entered the city triumphantly, riding on a young donkey, as crowds spread palm branches in his path. The people shouted, "Hosanna!" and "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." Their voices echoed off the stone walls with desperate hope. Mary watched the celebration with mixed emotions. She rejoiced that her son received the honor due him. She felt proud that people recognized his worth and mission. But she also knew how quickly crowds could turn. The same voices shouting praise today might demand blood tomorrow. The religious leaders watched Jesus' triumphal entry with growing alarm. They had hoped his influence would fade, but instead it blazed brighter than ever. The common people clearly viewed him as their champion and deliverer. Something had to be done quickly. Mary found lodging near the temple, close enough to observe the unfolding drama. Jesus spent his days teaching in the temple courts, drawing large crowds with his wisdom and authority. But each evening brought new reports of plots against him. The tension in Jerusalem was palpable. Pilgrims filled every street and courtyard. Roman soldiers patrolled more frequently, alert for any sign of trouble. The Jewish authorities moved carefully, knowing that the wrong action could spark a riot during the holy season. Mary prayed constantly during those days. She prayed for strength to endure what was coming. She prayed for Jesus' disciples, who would soon face tests they could not imagine. Most of all, she prayed for her son, though she knew his path was already fixed. The clouds were gathering quickly now. Mary could feel the storm approaching with every breath she took. The Last Supper and the waiting mother darkness fell over Jerusalem like a heavy curtain. Mary sat in her small borrowed room, listening to the sounds of Passover celebration echoing through the narrow streets. Families gathered around their tables, retelling the story of deliverance from Egypt. Children asked the traditional questions. Wine was poured and bread was broken in remembrance. But Mary's heart carried a different weight tonight. She knew Jesus was sharing his final meal with the 12 disciples somewhere in the city. She had not been invited to this gathering. The apostles would share this last sacred moment with her son while she waited alone in the shadows. The exclusion did not surprise her. Jesus' ministry had grown beyond family bonds. His message belonged to the world now, not just to those who shared his blood. Still, the mother's heart in her ached to be near him on this night of nights. Earlier that day, Mary had seen Jesus from a distance in the temple courts. He looked tired but resolute, like a man who had made peace with a difficult decision. His teachings had grown more urgent, more focused on eternal things. He spoke of love and sacrifice in ways that made his listeners weep. Mary had also noticed increased activity among the temple guards and religious leaders. They moved with purpose and barely concealed excitement. Whispered conversations stopped when she passed by. Eyes followed her with mixtures of pity and suspicion. She knew they were closing in on Jesus. The question was no longer if they would act, but when and how. The Passover crowds complicated their plans, but they would find a way. Power always found a way to eliminate threats. As night deepened, Mary tried to imagine what was happening at the upper room where Jesus supped with his friends. She pictured him breaking bread with those calloused hands that had once been so small in hers. She wondered if he spoke about his childhood or if he focused only on the mission ahead. The disciples would be confused by his words tonight. Jesus often spoke in ways that only became clear later. They expected political victory and earthly glory. Instead, he would give them symbols of suffering and death. Bread broken like his body, wine poured out like his blood. Mary understood the symbolism better than they did. She had carried the body that would be broken. She had felt the blood flowing through her veins that would soon flow from his wounds. The physical reality of motherhood gave her insights that even his closest followers lacked. A cool breeze stirred the curtains of her window. Mary pulled her shawl tighter and continued her vigil. She knew Jesus would pray in the garden after the meal. He often sought solitude with his Father during crucial moments. Tonight, his prayers would be more desperate than ever. She wondered if he was afraid. Jesus was fully human as well as fully divine. Surely, the prospect of torture and death troubled his flesh, even if his spirit remained willing. Mary had seen him weep over Jerusalem's coming destruction. She had watched him grieve at Lazarus's tomb. He felt pain as deeply as any person. The thought of her son's fear broke something inside Mary's chest. Every maternal instinct screamed at her to run to him, to comfort him as she had when he was small, but she forced herself to remain still. This was not her moment. This was between Jesus and his Father. Hours passed slowly. Mary dozed fitfully in her chair, starting awake at every sound from the street. Jerusalem never truly slept during Passover, but tonight seemed different. The very air felt charged with expectation and dread. Near midnight, Mary heard shouting in the distance. Torches flickered through her window as groups of men moved through the streets. The sounds grew closer, then faded again. She pressed her face against the cool stone wall, straining to understand what was happening. Then she knew. They had arrested him. Somewhere in the darkness, temple guards were binding Jesus' hands and leading him away. The final act of the drama had begun. There would be no more waiting, no more uncertainty. The sword that Simeon had prophesied would now pierce her soul completely. Mary sank to her knees on the hard floor. She had prayed for this moment to never come, even though she knew it must. She had hoped somehow that God would provide another way, even though the scriptures made the path clear. Now hope and denial fell away, leaving only the terrible reality of love's ultimate test. Her son was in the hands of his enemies. By morning, the world would see what mankind did to perfect love when it walked among them. Mary wept quietly in the darkness, not for herself, but for a world was about to make the greatest mistake in history. The night stretched endlessly ahead. There would be no sleep now, only prayer, only trust, only the long darkness before dawn. The trial, a mother's silent witness. Dawn broke gray and cold over Jerusalem. Mary had not slept. She sat by her window through the darkest hours, praying and listening to the distant sounds of commotion. Now, pale light revealed crowds already gathering in the streets. Word of Jesus' arrest had spread quickly through the city. Mary wrapped her cloak around her shoulders and stepped into the morning air. She needed to find her son. Maternal instinct pulled her forward despite the danger. She would not let Jesus face this alone, even if she could only watch from the shadows. The streets buzzed with the tension and excitement. Pilgrims who had come for Passover now found themselves witnesses to something unprecedented. Many had heard Jesus teach in the temple courts just days before. They whispered among themselves, trying to understand what was happening. Mary moved through the crowds like a ghost. Her heart pounded so hard she thought others might hear it. Every face she passed seemed to know her shame, that she was the mother of the arrested troublemaker. But most people were too focused on their own concerns to notice one more grieving woman. She followed the flow of people toward the fortress where Pilate held court. The Roman governor would hear Jesus' case, since the Jewish authorities lacked power to execute prisoners. Mary's legs felt weak as she climbed the stone steps, but she forced herself to continue. The courtyard filled rapidly with spectators. Mary pressed herself against a wall, trying to become invisible. She could see the judgment seat where Pilate would soon appear. Guards stood at attention around the platform. Everything was prepared for the morning's deadly theater. Then she saw him. Jesus stood between two soldiers, his hands bound with rope. His face was swollen from the night's beatings. Blood had dried in his hair and beard, but his eyes remained clear and calm, as if he were attending someone else's trial. Mary's knees nearly buckled. All her maternal strength abandoned her in that moment. This was her baby, her little boy who had once laughed at her silly songs. Now he stood bruised and bleeding before hostile judges, facing death for telling the truth about God's love. She wanted to cry out, to push through the crowd and gather him in her arms. She wanted to tend his wounds and smooth his matted hair. She wanted to take him home to Nazareth, where he would be safe. But she could only watch in helpless silence as events unfolded according to God's terrible plan. Pilate emerged from his chambers looking annoyed and sleepy. He clearly did not want to deal with Jewish religious disputes so early in the morning. The crowd stirred with anticipation as he took his seat on the judgment throne. The accusations began immediately. The chief priests and elders had prepared their case carefully. They charged Jesus with claiming to be a king, with stirring up rebellion, with threatening the temple. They spoke with passionate conviction, as if they truly believed their own words. Mary listened to their lies with growing horror. These men had heard Jesus teach about love and forgiveness. They knew his message was spiritual, not political. Yet they twisted his words into weapons against him. Truth meant nothing when power felt threatened. Pilate questioned Jesus with obvious reluctance. The Roman governor was experienced enough to recognize innocence when he saw it. Jesus answered some questions and remained silent for others. His dignity in the face of false accusations was heartbreaking and magnificent. Mary watched her son's composure with amazement and grief. Even now, even facing death, Jesus showed no anger toward his accusers. He looked at them with something approaching pity. This was the man they were determined to destroy, someone whose only crime was loving too much. The crowd grew restless as Pilate hesitated. He clearly wanted to release Jesus, but feared the political consequences. The Jewish leaders sensed his uncertainty and pressed their advantage. They threatened to report him to Caesar if he freed a rebel king. Mary saw the moment when Pilate's resolve crumbled. Fear of losing his position overcame any desire to do justice. He called for water and made a show of washing his hands, declaring himself innocent of Jesus' blood. The gesture fooled no one, least of all himself. "Crucify him! Crucify him!" The crowd's chant echoed off the stone walls. Mary felt each word like a physical blow. These were the same people who had welcomed Jesus into the city with palm branches just days before. Now they bayed for his blood with equal enthusiasm. Jesus stood motionless through it all. His eyes searched the crowd briefly, and for one terrifying moment, Mary thought he had seen her. But his gaze moved on without recognition. Perhaps it was better that way. She could bear her own grief, but not his added sorrow at seeing her pain. The sentence was pronounced with brutal efficiency. Jesus would be crucified that morning along with two common thieves. The crowd cheered as if their team had won a sporting contest. Guards began preparing for the procession to Golgotha. Mary pressed her back against the cold stone wall, feeling as if the world was ending. In a sense, it was. Perfect love was about to be murdered by the very people it came to save. The irony was so complete it took her breath away. As they led Jesus away, Mary finally moved from her hiding place. She would follow him to the end, no matter what it cost her. She was his mother. This mother. This was her place, her calling, her unbearable privilege. The mother's vigil was only beginning. The road to Golgotha, the cross in her eyes. The morning sun rises cold over Jerusalem. Mary walks through streets she has known since childhood, yet everything feels different now. Her son moves ahead, stumbling under the weight of rough-hewn wood. The crowd presses around them, some jeering, others weeping. She follows at a distance, each step heavier than the last. The wooden beam scrapes against stone. Jesus falls. Mary's heart lurches forward, but soldiers push her back. A mother's instinct wars with helplessness. She can only watch as strangers help him rise. The procession moves like a funeral march through the city gates. Mary sees familiar faces in the crowd, women who once brought their children to hear Jesus teach. Now they turn away, afraid to be seen. Fear has replaced wonder in their eyes. Simon of Cyrene takes up the cross. Mary feels a moment's gratitude toward this stranger who shows mercy when others show cruelty. The weight shifts from her son's shoulders, but not from her heart. She knows where this path leads. The hill called Golgotha looms ahead. Its name means place of the skull. How fitting, Mary thinks. Death rules here. The ground beneath her feet has drunk the blood of countless condemned men. Now it waits for more. She remembers other walks they took together. Little feet beside hers on dusty roads around Nazareth, his hand in hers as they climbed hills to pick olives. Those same feet now leave bloody prints on stone. Those same hands will soon be pierced. The crowd grows thicker near the execution site. Some push closer for a better view. Others hang back, covering their children's eyes. Mary moves forward anyway. She will not abandon him now. A mother belongs with her child, no matter what comes. Roman soldiers busy themselves with their grim work. They strip Jesus of his clothes. Mary turns away for a moment, then forces herself to look. She will witness every moment. She will remember everything. Someone must carry this story forward. The cross lies flat on the ground. Jesus is pressed down upon it. Mary hears the first hammer blow. The sound echoes off stone walls and pierces straight through her. She doubles over as if struck herself. The nail finds its mark. Another blow falls. Each strike reverberates through her bones. This is her baby's flesh being torn. These are the hands that once reached for her in the night when nightmares came. Now they reach toward heaven as metal tears through them. The second hand is secured, then his feet. Mary watches her son become a thing to be lifted up and displayed. The cross rises with ropes and shouts. It drops into its hole with a thud that shakes the earth. Jesus hangs suspended between heaven and earth. The crowd settles in to wait. Some gamble for his clothes, others mock and jeer. A few weep quietly. Mary finds herself among the mourners, the faithful few who refuse to leave. She plants herself at the foot of the cross like a tree with deep roots. Hours pass slowly. The sun climbs higher. Jesus speaks little, each word costing him greatly. Mary listens to every whisper, stores every glance. Their eyes meet across the space between earth and cross. In that look passes a lifetime of love, sorrow, and understanding. She remembers his birth in Bethlehem's stable. She held him close against the cold night air. Now she cannot hold him, cannot comfort him, cannot take his place. The distance between them feels infinite, though she stands just below. The sky begins to darken, though noon has passed. An unnatural twilight settles over Jerusalem. Even the earth seems to mourn. The very air grows heavy with grief. Mary pulls her cloak tighter, but the cold comes from within. At the foot of the cross, unspeakable pain. Darkness covers the land like a burial shroud. Mary stands rooted to this spot of cursed ground, her eyes fixed upward where her son hangs dying. Time moves differently here. Minutes stretch into hours. Hours compress into heartbeats. She is not alone, but she might as well be. John stands beside her, young and shaken. Mary Magdalene weeps openly. A few other women huddle together against the horror. Yet Mary feels utterly isolated in her grief. No one else carried him for 9 months. No one else taught him to walk. The soldiers continue their work around the crosses. 3 men hang here today. 2 thieves bracket her son. One mocks him even now. The other defends him. Mary marvels that Jesus can inspire loyalty even in his darkest hour. Even thieves see something divine in him. Her son's breathing grows labored. Each breath costs him dearly. Mary finds herself breathing with him, willing her lungs to help his somehow. If she could take this suffering upon herself, she would do it gladly. But grace rarely works that way. Woman, behold your son. Jesus speaks through cracked lips, nodding toward John. Behold your mother. He gives her to the young apostle's care. Even in agony, he thinks of others. Even dying, he provides for those he loves. Mary understands. She gains a son in John. John gains a mother in her. But no one can replace the one she loses today. No substitute exists for this particular love, this unique bond forged in her womb and sealed with 30 years of shared life. The crowd grows restless as the afternoon wears on. Some drift away, their bloodlust satisfied. Others remain, sensing they witness something unprecedented. The darkness deepens. Strange things happen when God dies on a cross. Jesus cries out in a loud voice. The words echo off stone and bone. My God, why have you forsaken me?" Mary recognizes the psalm. Even now, he speaks scripture. Even abandoned, he clings to ancient promises. The faithful words of David become his own. But Mary hears more than scripture in that cry. She hears the child who woke from nightmares calling for her. She hears the boy who scraped his knee running to her for comfort. She hears her son asking questions she cannot answer. Why must this happen? Why can't she fix it? The earth trembles beneath their feet. Rocks split open. The veil in the temple tears from top to bottom. Creation itself responds to this moment. Even stones have more voice than Mary does now. Grief has stolen her words. I thirst. The simple words carry oceans of meaning. Mary remembers nursing him as a baby. She remembers countless cups of water shared at their table. She remembers drawing from Jacob's well while he rested nearby. Now she cannot give him even a sip. A soldier soaks a sponge in sour wine and lifts it on a stick. Jesus tastes it briefly. Mary watches this small mercy, grateful for any kindness shown. She has learned to treasure the smallest human decencies in this place of horror. The sky grows darker still. An unnatural night falls at midday. The very sun seems to hide its face rather than witness this scene. Mary understands. Some sights are too terrible for light to bear. Some moments require darkness to hold them. It is finished. 3 words that change everything. Jesus speaks them clearly, definitively. His work is complete, his mission accomplished. Mary hears triumph in his voice, even as her heart breaks. He has done what he came to do. Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. The final words come as a whisper that somehow carries across the hilltop. Jesus bows his head forward. His chest stops rising, his eyes close. Mary's world ends. The silence that follows is absolute. Even the mockers fall quiet. The soldiers stop their gambling. Wind ceases to blow. The very air holds its breath. Death has won the day, or so it seems. Mary stares at the still form that once danced in her womb. John's arm comes around her shoulders. She leans into him without thinking. Her legs feel unsteady. Her vision blurs with tears. The young man leads her away from the cross. She goes because she must, but part of her remains forever at the foot of that tree. The burial in the longest silence. Evening approaches with heavy steps. The Sabbath draws near, bringing its own urgency to this day of death. Jewish law requires bodies to be removed before sunset. Mary watches from a distance as powerful men approach the cross where her son hangs. Joseph from Arimathea arrives with official papers. A secret follower of Jesus, he has found courage at last. Wealth and position open doors that grief alone cannot. He requests the body from Pilate. The governor grants permission with surprising speed. Nicodemus comes too, the Pharisee who once visited Jesus by night. He brings spices, myrrh and aloes mixed together, this nearly 100 pounds worth. Such expensive burial preparations speak of deep respect. Even Jesus' enemies recognize something special has died today. The latter leans against the cross. Strong hands work to remove the nails. Mary turns away as metal pulls free from flesh. Some sights even a mother cannot bear twice. The sound of his body falling into waiting arms reaches her ears. They wrap him in clean linen cloths with the aromatic spices between the layers. Ancient customs guide their movements. Death has its rituals, its proper procedures. Mary has done this before for her own parents, but never for her child. The natural order lies broken on the ground. A tomb waits nearby, carved fresh from rock. Joseph had prepared it for himself, but offers it now for Jesus. The heavy stone fits perfectly in its groove. Mary watches them roll it shut with a sound like thunder. Her son disappears behind limestone and darkness. The women who followed Jesus gather around Mary. They plan to return after the Sabbath with additional spices. There was no time for proper preparation today. They will honor him correctly when law allows. Mary nods but says nothing. Words feel useless now. John leads her away to his home in the city. The streets seem unaware that anything has changed. People buy bread, tend children, prepare for evening meals. Life continues as if the world has not shifted on its axis, as if God has not died and been buried. The Sabbath begins at sunset. Candles are lit in windows across Jerusalem. Families gather for traditional meals. Prayers rise from countless homes. But in John's house, silence reigns. Mary sits without moving, without speaking, without eating. Grief has no appetite. Sleep brings no relief. Mary lies awake, staring at ceiling beams. Every time she closes her eyes, she sees the cross. Every breath reminds her that he no longer breathes. The night stretches endlessly forward. Dawn feels impossible. Saturday dawns gray and cold. The Sabbath commandment forbids work, but what work could Mary do anyway? Her hands lie idle in her lap. Her mind runs in circles like a bird trapped in a cage. The law's rest feels more like prison than blessing. John tries to coax her to eat. The other women bring food and comfort. Mary accepts their care without truly receiving it. She exists in a bubble of sorrow that nothing can penetrate. Even kindness bounces off her like rain on stone. The day passes with agonizing slowness. Each hour feels like a year. Mary counts the minutes since his last breath. She calculates the hours since the tomb sealed shut. Time becomes her enemy, stretching each moment of pain into eternity. Memory floods in to fill the silence. She remembers his first cry as a newborn, his first steps across their floor in Nazareth, his first words, "Mama," spoken with infant lips, the boy who helped Joseph in the workshop, the young man who studied Torah with the elders. She recalls moments of pride, when others praised his wisdom, when crowds hung on his words, when sick people walked away healed. She remembers moments of worry, when he stayed behind in the temple, when he left home to preach, when enemies began plotting against him. Now, all those memories feel like borrowed time. 33 years that pass too quickly, a lifetime compressed into decades that feel like moments. Mary would trade anything for one more conversation, one more embrace, one more chance to say goodbye properly. The sun sets on Saturday. Another day ends without him. Mary faces the terrible mathematics of grief. Each sunset takes her further from their last moment together. Each sunrise begins another day he will not see. Time becomes distance, and distance becomes pain. Night falls again, the second night since the cross. Mary lies in darkness and wonders what comes next. How does a mother learn to live without the child who made her a mother? How does life continue when its center has been torn away? The women whisper plans for tomorrow. They will go to the tomb at first light. They will complete the burial preparations that Friday's haste prevented. They will honor him with proper spices and careful attention. Mary listens, but cannot imagine tomorrow. This Saturday stretches between death and whatever comes after. It feels like the longest day in human history. Even God seems absent, hiding behind the stone that seals the tomb. The world holds its breath and waits for Monday, though no one can say what Monday might bring. The resurrection, a mother's quiet joy. Sunday morning arrives before the city awakens. Mary rises before dawn, moving quietly through John's home. The women gather in whispered conversations, preparing spices and burial cloths. Someone must complete yesterday's interrupted work. Mary Magdalene leads the small group through empty streets. Their footsteps echo off stone walls. The city sleeps, unaware that this day will change everything. Even the guards at various gates seem drowsy, waving them through without question. The garden tomb lies outside the walls. Olive trees cast long shadows in the pre-dawn light. Birds begin their morning songs as the women approach the burial site. Everything appears normal until they round the final bend in the path. The stone stands rolled away. The massive boulder that sealed the tomb sits off to one side, as if pushed by giant hands. The opening yawns dark and empty. The women freeze, unsure what this means or what they should do next. Mary Magdalene runs forward first. She peers into the darkness, then staggers backward with a gasp. The tomb is empty. Clean burial cloths lie folded neatly where a body should rest. Their carefully planned mourning has taken an impossible turn. They have taken him, Mary Magdalene whispers. Fresh grief mixes with confusion. Grave robbing was not uncommon, but why steal a body and leave expensive burial spices behind? Why fold the cloth so carefully? Why leave no trace of struggle or haste? The women scatter to spread the news. Some run to find Peter and John. Others hurry back to Jerusalem to tell the wider group of followers. Mary finds herself alone in the garden, standing before the empty tomb with questions that have no earthly answers. She steps inside the limestone chamber. Morning light filters through the entrance, illuminating the empty shelf where Jesus lay. The burial cloths remain undisturbed. No signs of violence mark the walls. This appears less like theft than like something else entirely. Two figures in white sit where the head and feet of Jesus had been. Angels, though Mary recognizes them as such only gradually. Their presence feels natural in this place where natural laws seem suspended. They speak gently, without alarm or drama. Why do you seek the living among the dead? The question hangs in the cool air. Mary ponders its meaning. Why indeed would life be found in a tomb? Yet where else should she look for him? Death seemed so final yesterday. The angels remind her of Jesus' own words. He told them this would happen. Death would not hold him. 3 days, he said. Mary counts backwards from Friday. Today marks the third day exactly. Could he have meant this literally? She turns to leave the tomb and nearly collides with a man standing in the garden. The gardener, she assumes. He speaks kindly, asking whom she seeks. Mary explains about the missing body, the empty tomb, the confusion of this strange morning. Mary. Her name spoken in a familiar voice stops her heart. She turns fully toward the man and sees not a gardener but her son, alive, standing, speaking. The word impossible dies on her lips as joy floods her chest. She reaches toward him, but he steps back gently. Do not cling to me, he says with tender firmness. I have not yet ascended to the Father. The resurrection body is different somehow, the same but changed, present but transitional. Mary understands without understanding. This is her son, but also more than her son. The man who died on Friday has become something new. Death could not contain him. The grave could not hold him. Life has won the ultimate victory. She wants to embrace him, to touch his face, to assure herself this is real. But his words create necessary distance. This reunion is temporary. He has work to do, places to be, a mission to complete. Even resurrection operates on heaven's schedule. Go tell the others, he instructs. Mary nods, though leaving feels impossible. How do you walk away from a miracle? How do you leave the presence of the impossible made real? Yet obedience has always marked her relationship with God. She runs back toward the city, her heart lighter than it has been in months. The grief that crushed her spirit lifts like morning mist. Death has been defeated. Her son lives. The tomb stands empty, not from theft, but from triumph. The other women see her joy before she speaks. Something in her face, her step, her very presence announces the impossible news. He is risen, she tells them simply. 3 words that restore the world to proper order. Not everyone believes immediately. Such news sounds too good to be true. Death rarely reverses its verdicts. Graves seldom give up their treasures. Yet Mary speaks with such quiet certainty that doubt begins to crumble. Peter and John run to see for themselves. They find the tomb exactly as Mary described. Empty, clean, peaceful. The burial cloths folded with care that no thief would show, evidence of something beyond their understanding. Mary returns to John's house, her steps light on stone streets. The city begins to wake around her. Merchants prepare their stalls, children play in doorways. Life continues, unaware that life itself has won its greatest victory. She sits quietly in the morning sunshine, processing what she has seen. Her son lives. Death could not hold him. The grave could not claim him. Joy replaces sorrow. Hope conquers despair. Sunday morning changes everything. The aftermath, life without her son, days blend into weeks as news of the resurrection spreads through Jerusalem and beyond. Mary finds herself at the center of a community transformed by the impossible. Grief has given way to joy, but adjustment brings its own challenges. The other followers gather daily to share meals, pray together, and try to understand what has happened. Peter speaks with new authority. John shows deeper wisdom. Thomas moves beyond doubt to faith. Everyone seems changed by these recent events. Mary watches this transformation with wonder. These are the same people who scattered in fear on Friday night, the same disciples who hid behind locked doors on Saturday. Now they speak boldly about resurrection and eternal life. Fear has been replaced by fire. Jesus appears among them at unexpected moments, sometimes during meals, sometimes in locked rooms, sometimes along familiar roads. Each appearance strengthens their faith and deepens their understanding. Death has become a doorway rather than a destination. Yet Mary feels a peculiar loneliness in the midst of this joy. Her relationship with Jesus must change now. He is no longer simply her son, but the risen Lord of all creation. The intimate mother-child bond transforms into something more universal and less personal. She shares him now with the world in ways she could not have imagined. Every person touched by his story becomes part of his family. Every follower gains a claim on his attention. Mary learns to release her unique position as his mother. The adjustment proves difficult. 33 years of being his primary human relationship cannot be easily set aside. She remembers nursing him through childhood illnesses. She recalls mending his clothes and preparing his meals. Those days seem like another lifetime. Now he appears and disappears according to heavenly schedules. He speaks of returning to the Father. He prepares his followers for his absence rather than his presence. Even resurrection comes with the promise of eventual departure. Mary finds comfort in the community of believers. The women who stood with her at the cross become sisters in this new family. The disciples who once competed for Jesus' attention now compete to serve one another. Love multiplies rather than divides. She helps prepare meals for the growing group. Her hands find familiar comfort in domestic tasks. Feeding people, cleaning spaces, mending clothes. These simple acts of service provide stability in a world turned upside down by miracle. The stories begin to take shape as the weeks pass. Matthew writes down Jesus' teachings. Mark records Peter's memories. Luke interviews witnesses and compiles careful accounts. John reflects deeply on theological meanings. Mary contributes her own recollections. She tells them about the Annunciation, about the angel's words, about her fear and acceptance. She describes the journey to Bethlehem, the birth in the stable, the visit from shepherds. Her memories become treasures shared with the community. The wedding at Cana takes on new significance in their discussions. Mary's role in prompting Jesus' first miracle becomes a model for intercessory prayer. Her simple words, "Do whatever he tells you," become guidance for all believers. They ask her about his childhood, his growth, his development. Mary shares what she can while protecting what should remain private. Some memories belong to mothers alone. Some moments are too sacred for public consumption. The community grows daily as word spreads throughout the city. Priests and Pharisees who once opposed Jesus come seeking truth. Roman soldiers ask questions about this man who conquered death. Even Gentiles express interest in the resurrection story. Mary observes this expansion with amazement. Her son's influence reaches far beyond anything she could have imagined. The baby born in Bethlehem's stable has become the cornerstone of a global movement. God's plan proves larger than any human mind could conceive. Yet she misses the simple intimacy of their early years. She would trade all this cosmic significance for one quiet evening in their Nazareth home. She would exchange worldwide fame for one more conversation over supper. Motherhood wants what motherhood has always wanted: more time. Jesus appears to them one final time on a mountain outside Jerusalem. He speaks of going to prepare a place for them. He promises to return someday. He gives them the Holy Spirit as comfort and guide. Then he ascends into heaven as they watch. Mary stands among the disciples, her face turned skyward long after he disappears from sight. This departure feels different from death. This separation carries promise rather than finality. Yet the ache in her heart remains real and sharp. Angels appear to remind them that he will return as he has gone. The promise provides hope, but not immediate comfort. Mary must learn to live with absence made bearable by future reunion. Faith must fill the space left by physical presence. They return to Jerusalem with worship in their hearts and questions on their minds. What comes next? How do they continue without his visible leadership? How do they spread this message to the ends of the earth? The answers will come, but not all at once. The upper room, the Spirit descends. 10 days pass since Jesus ascended from their sight. The disciples gathered daily in the upper room where they shared their final meal with him. Prayer fills the hours between dawn and dusk. Waiting becomes their primary occupation. Mary joins them faithfully, her presence bringing comfort to the uncertain group. She who waited 9 months for his birth now waits again for whatever comes next. Patience has become her spiritual discipline, refined through days of practice. 120 believers crowd into the room and adjoining spaces. Men and women, young and old, Jews from various regions and backgrounds. Unity emerges from diversity as they focus on their common hope and shared experience of the risen Christ. They pray in shifts, maintaining constant communication with heaven. Some recite familiar psalms. Others speak spontaneous words from their hearts. Silence punctuates their vocal prayers. The room hums with spiritual energy even in quiet moments. Mary often finds herself thinking of the Annunciation. The angel's words echo in her memory: "Nothing is impossible with God." She believed those words when they seemed absurd. She believes them now as they await another impossible intervention. The festival of Pentecost arrives with its familiar rhythms. Jerusalem fills with pilgrims from across the known world. Jewish communities from every nation send representatives to celebrate the harvest festival and remember the giving of the law at Sinai. Morning prayers begin as usual in their upper room. The assembled believers lift their voices in thanksgiving and petition. Mary's voice blends with the others, her prayers rising like incense toward heaven. Then something extraordinary begins to happen. Wind fills the room, though no windows stand open. Not a gentle breeze, but a rushing, mighty sound that seems to come from everywhere at once. The very air begins to move with supernatural force. Everyone feels it, hears it, experiences it simultaneously. Tongues of fire appear above each person's head, not flames that burn, but light that illuminates. Each tongue dances individually while remaining part of a greater blaze. The room fills with light that casts no shadows and generates no heat. Mary feels the fire settle upon her like a crown. Warmth spreads through her body from head to toe. Her mind clears with sudden understanding. Her heart overflows with joy beyond description. The Holy Spirit has come as Jesus promised. Then she begins to speak, but not in Aramaic or Hebrew. Words flow from her lips in languages she has never learned. The same phenomenon occurs throughout the room. Everyone speaks, but everyone speaks differently, each in tongues unknown to them before this moment. The sound draws crowds from the street below. Pilgrims gathering for the festival hear the commotion and climb toward its source. What they find confounds their understanding. Galilean fishermen and women speaking fluently in languages from across the world. How can this be? They ask each other. These people are from Galilee, yet each of us hears them speaking in our own native language. Parthians and Medes, Elamites and residents of Mesopotamia all hear the wonders of God declared in their mother tongues. Some marvel at the miracle. Others mock and suggest the believers have drunk too much wine. Peter stands to address the crowd, his voice carrying new authority and power. The Holy Spirit transforms fishermen into preachers, mothers into missionaries. Mary listens as Peter explains what has happened. He quotes the prophet Joel's words about God pouring out his Spirit on all flesh. Sons and daughters will prophesy. Old men will dream dreams. Young men will see visions. Even servants will receive the Spirit's power. The gift includes her as fully as it includes the men. Gender creates no barrier to the Spirit's work. Age poses no obstacle to divine empowerment. Mary experiences the same baptism of fire that falls upon Peter and John and all the rest. She remembers Hannah's song from centuries before, when the barren woman conceived Samuel. She recalls her own Magnificat sung in Elizabeth's home when both carried miraculous children. Now she participates in another song, this one sung in languages of the world. 3,000 people respond to Peter's sermon that day. Baptisms continue from morning until evening. The community that numbered 120 suddenly multiplies beyond counting. The church explodes into existence with supernatural force. Mary watches the baptisms with tears of joy streaming down her face. Each person who disappears beneath the water and rises again reminds her of her son's death and resurrection. His victory becomes their victory. His new life becomes their new life. The upper room can no longer contain the growing community. They spill into homes throughout Jerusalem. Daily meetings become multiple gatherings. What began as a small group of disciples becomes a movement that transforms the city. Mary finds her role changing once again. No longer simply the mother of Jesus, she becomes a mother to the church. Her presence brings comfort to new believers. Her memories of Jesus provide foundation for their faith. Her prayers cover them like a protective cloak. The Holy Spirit continues working through her as through all the believers. She prays for the sick and sees them healed. She speaks words of prophecy that strengthen the community. She teaches younger women about faith and obedience and trust in God's impossible promises. Evening falls on this day of wonders. The city buzzes with excitement and confusion. Religious leaders plot responses to this unexpected development. Roman authorities wonder about the political implications of such gatherings. But in homes throughout Jerusalem, new believers pray with joy. Mary returns to John's house, her heart full and her mind reeling. The promise has been fulfilled. The Helper has come. The Spirit of her Son now dwells within her and within thousands of others. The church has been born in power and fire. Mary's final years, the mother of the movement years, flow by like a gentle stream. Mary ages gracefully in John's home, her face bearing the marks of both sorrow and joy. The church continues growing throughout Jerusalem and beyond. Her role shifts from active participant to honored elder. Young believers seek her out for stories about Jesus. They want to hear about his childhood, his growth into manhood, his daily habits and private thoughts. Mary shares carefully, protecting some memories while offering others as gifts to strengthen faith. She tells them about his laughter, his compassion for animals, his skill with tools in Joseph's workshop. She describes his love of Scripture, his questions about divine mysteries, his gradual understanding of his unique calling. These human details make his divine nature more approachable. The apostles venture farther from Jerusalem as time passes. Peter travels to Rome. Paul journeys throughout the Mediterranean world. Thomas reportedly reaches India. The message spreads like seeds on wind, taking root in distant soil. Mary receives occasional visitors bearing news from these far places. Churches have been established in Syria, in Asia Minor, in Greece, and beyond. Her son's name is praised in languages she has never heard by people she will never meet on earth. Sometimes the reports bring concern. False teachers twist the message. Persecution arises in various cities. Believers face imprisonment, exile, slaves, even death for their faith. Mary prays daily for these scattered sheep, these spiritual children she will never embrace. Her own prayer life deepens with age. Long hours spent in quiet communion with God replace the active service of earlier years. She intercedes for the Church Universal, for specific communities, for individual believers facing trials. John remains her faithful companion and protector. He has grown from the young man who stood with her at the cross into a mature leader of the Jerusalem church. His care for her reflects Jesus' dying words, "Behold your mother." They often speak of the early days, comparing their memories of events they both witnessed. John's perspective as a disciple complements her view as a mother. Together, they possess a complete picture of Jesus' earthly ministry from beginning to end. Other women from those early days visit regularly. Mary Magdalene shares stories from her travels. Martha and Mary from Bethany bring news from their village. The women who followed Jesus maintain bonds forged in their shared devotion to him. Physical limitations gradually restrict Mary's movements. Walking becomes difficult. Her voice grows softer. Her energy diminishes with the passing seasons. Yet her spirit remains vibrant, her faith unshaken, her love for God's people constant. She experiences visions sometimes, glimpses of heavenly realities that strengthen her hope. She sees Jesus in his glory, preparing places for his followers, as he promised. She witnesses the great multitude that no one can number, people from every nation worshiping together. Letters arrive from various churches, some addressed specifically to her. Believers across the known world consider her their spiritual mother. They request her prayers, her blessing, her remembrance before God. Her influence extends far beyond Jerusalem's walls. Mary dictates responses when strength permits. She blesses the churches, encourages faithfulness, promises continued prayers. Her words carry special authority because of her unique relationship with Jesus. Everyone knows she speaks from intimate knowledge. Local believers gather around her bed during her final illness. They pray for healing, but also for grace to accept God's will. Mary shows no fear of death, only quiet anticipation of reunion with her son and with Joseph, with Elizabeth and Zechariah, with all who have gone before. She speaks of seeing Jesus again, of having questions answered, of understanding mysteries that remain hidden in this life. Death appears to her not as enemy, but as doorway, not as ending, but as beginning of something better. Her breathing becomes labored. John holds one hand while Mary Magdalene holds the other. The room fills with quiet prayers and gentle songs. Mary's lips move silently, perhaps in prayer, perhaps in conversation with visitors from another realm. As evening shadows lengthen, Mary's breathing slows and finally stops. Her face remains peaceful, almost smiling. Those present sense that her spirit has simply moved from one room to another, from earth's temporary dwelling to heaven's eternal home. John closes her eyes and folds her hands across her chest. The mother of Jesus appears to sleep peacefully. Her long journey of faith has reached its earthly conclusion, but her story will continue through the church she helped birth and nurture. The Assumption, the mystery of her death. News of Mary's passing spreads quickly through Jerusalem's Christian community. Believers gather to honor the woman who gave birth to their Savior, who stood by him through ministry and crucifixion, who witnessed his resurrection and received the Holy Spirit. Preparations for burial follow Jewish customs modified by Christian hope. The body is washed and anointed with precious spices. Clean linen wrappings replace her simple clothing. Prayers mingle with tears as the community says farewell to their spiritual mother. Yet something unusual occurs during these familiar rituals. Those who handle Mary's body notice its remarkable preservation. No signs of decay mar her features. Her skin remains soft and warm to the touch. Even death seems gentler with her than with ordinary mortals. The burial procession forms at John's house. Believers from throughout the city join the solemn march. They carry her body to a tomb prepared in the Kidron Valley, not far from where Jesus was buried and rose again. The location seems fitting for one so close to him. As they place her body in the tomb, strange sounds fill the air. Some hear angelic music, harmonies beyond earthly composition. Others perceive the fragrance of paradise, scents more lovely than any earthly flower. Heaven seems to draw near during these sacred moments. The tomb is sealed according to custom. The mourners disperse to their homes, carrying memories of an extraordinary woman and mother. Yet within days, persistent rumors begin circulating through the Christian community. Something unprecedented has happened. Several believers report visiting the tomb only to find it empty. The burial cloths remain, folded neatly as they were found in Jesus' tomb 3 days after his crucifixion. But Mary's body has vanished without trace or explanation. Some suggest grave robbers, but nothing valuable was buried with her. Others propose that enemies of the church stole the body to prevent veneration. Yet no group claims responsibility, and the empty tomb's peaceful condition argues against violent theft. Alternative explanations emerge among the faithful. Perhaps God has raised Mary as he raised her son. Perhaps she has been taken up to heaven while still clothed in flesh. Perhaps death could not hold one so pure and holy. The apostles investigate these claims carefully. They question witnesses, examine the empty tomb, and pray for divine guidance. While they cannot prove what happened, neither can they explain the mystery through natural means. John, who cared for Mary until her final breath, speaks with quiet conviction about what he believes occurred. God took her to himself, body and soul, as reward for her perfect obedience and faith. Death became translation, burial became assumption. Not everyone accepts this explanation immediately. Some prefer to wait for clearer evidence. Others argue that only Jesus should experience bodily resurrection. Yet the empty tomb stands as silent testimony to something beyond ordinary death. Years pass without resolution to the mystery. The tomb remains empty. No body is ever found. No natural explanation satisfies all the evidence. The assumption of Mary becomes accepted belief among many Christians, though debate continues in various communities. Those who knew her best speak with growing conviction about her special destiny. Her unique role as mother of the Messiah, they argue, merited unique treatment in death. God honored her faithfulness with translation rather than corruption. Pilgrims begin visiting the empty tomb. They come seeking blessing, healing, intercession. Stories emerge of miracles associated with the site. Whether these reports reflect reality or wishful thinking remains unclear, yet the visits continue. The mystery deepens rather than clarifies with time. What began as puzzling disappearance evolves into treasured doctrine for some believers. Mary's assumption becomes symbol of hope for all who follow her son. Death need not have final victory. Different communities develop varying traditions about her final moments. Some emphasize peaceful death followed by bodily resurrection. Others prefer the idea of translation without death. All agree that something extraordinary marked her departure from earth. Artists begin depicting the Assumption in various forms. Paintings show Mary rising toward heaven surrounded by angels. Sculptures capture her serene expression as she ascends. These visual representations shape popular understanding of the mystery. The empty tomb itself becomes place of pilgrimage and prayer. Believers gather there on the anniversary of her death. They sing hymns, share memories, and petition for her intercession. The site transforms from burial place to shrine. Whether the Assumption represents historical fact or symbolic truth, it expresses deep Christian conviction about Mary's significance. The woman who said yes to God's impossible plan receives impossible reward. Faith recognizes fitness in this outcome. The mystery remains unsolved in any final sense. Each generation of believers must decide what to make of the empty tomb, the missing body, the persistent traditions. Evidence supports various interpretations without proving any conclusively. Yet the very mystery serves important purpose. It keeps Mary's story open-ended, allowing each believer to encounter her afresh. She becomes not merely historical figure, but living presence, not just ancient mother, but contemporary intercessor. The rise of Marian devotion. Decades pass since Mary's mysterious departure from earth. The church spreads throughout the Roman Empire and beyond. With geographic expansion comes theological development. Mary's role in salvation history receives increasing attention and honor. Early Christian writers begin exploring her significance more deeply. They compare her to Eve, noting how her obedience reversed the first woman's disobedience. Where Eve brought death through sin, Mary brought life through faith. The parallel captures Christian imagination. Her perpetual virginity becomes topic of scholarly debate. Some argue that she remained virgin throughout her life, making Jesus her only child. Others point to gospel references about his brothers and sisters. The discussion shapes developing doctrine about her nature. Artistic representations multiply as Christianity gains legal status. Paintings in Roman catacombs show Mary holding the infant Jesus. Mosaics in early churches depict her as Queen of Heaven. These images reflect growing reverence for her person and role. The title, Mother of God, gains prominence in theological circles. If Jesus is truly divine, they reason, then Mary who bore him deserves this exalted designation. The logic seems impeccable, though the phrase sounds shocking to some ears. Council meetings address questions about Mary's status. Bishops gather to define orthodox teaching about her relationship to Christ and to believers. Their decisions become binding doctrine for churches accepting conciliar authority. Popular devotion often outpaces official theology. Ordinary believers develop prayers, hymns, and customs honoring Mary. They seek her intercession for personal needs. They credit her with miraculous interventions. Folk religion embraces her warmly. Pilgrimage sites associated with Mary appear throughout the Christian world. Places claiming connection to her life, Nazareth, Bethlehem, Jerusalem, attract visitors seeking blessing. Each location develops its own traditions and miracle stories. Feast days celebrating Mary enter the liturgical calendar. Her nativity, presentation, annunciation, and assumption receive special commemoration. These celebrations punctuate the church year with reminders of her importance to salvation. Monasteries dedicated to Mary establish themselves across Europe and Asia. Religious communities take her as their special patroness. They develop devotional practices centered on her virtues: humility, obedience, purity, compassion. The Ave Maria prayer emerges from scriptural sources. Gabriel's greeting combined with Elizabeth's blessing creates familiar formula. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with you. Blessed are you among women, and blessed is the fruit of your womb. Theological reflection on Mary's sinlessness develops gradually. Some propose that she was preserved from original sin to make her worthy vessel for the incarnation. This doctrine of the Immaculate Conception generates both support and controversy. Marian apparitions begin appearing in various locations. Believers report visions of Mary delivering messages for the church or world. These mystical experiences, whether accepted or rejected officially, influence popular devotion significantly. The Rosary develops as distinctive Marian prayer form. Repeated Hail Marys combined with meditation on gospel mysteries create devotional practice accessible to literate and illiterate alike. The beads become symbol of Catholic identity. Art reaches new heights in depicting Mary. Renaissance masters create masterpieces showing her in various roles: Tender Mother, Grieving Pietà, Glorious Assumption. These works shape how countless believers visualize her. Cathedral construction reflects Marian devotion. Notre Dame cathedrals rise throughout Europe, each one testimony to love for Our Lady. Gothic architecture reaches toward heaven in stone expression of Marian reverence. Different cultures adapt Marian devotion to local customs and needs. Mexican Catholics embrace Our Lady of Guadalupe. Irish believers venerate the Black Madonna. Each community finds in Mary what it most needs: comfort, protection, understanding. Protestant Reformation challenges some Marian doctrines and practices. Reformers argue that excessive devotion to Mary obscures Christ's unique mediation. Catholics respond by defending traditional teachings while sometimes moderating popular excesses. The development continues across centuries. Each generation discovers new aspects of Mary's significance. She evolves from simple Jewish girl into cosmic figure, from historical person into eternal archetype of faith and motherhood. Modern papal declarations affirm Mary's special status. The Immaculate Conception becomes dogma in 1854. The Assumption receives similar declaration in 1950. These pronouncements codify beliefs held by many believers for centuries, yet the core remains constant throughout all development. Mary represents perfect human response to divine initiative. Her yes to Gabriel's announcement echoes through history as model for all believers facing God's call. The rise of Marian devotion reflects deep human need for maternal comfort and intercession. In Mary, believers find approachable advocate who understands their struggles. She bridges the gap between divine transcendence and human need. The legacy of Mary, mother to billions. 20 centuries have passed since Mary spoke her world-changing yes to Gabriel's impossible announcement. Her influence extends far beyond the small village where she first heard those fateful words. Today, billions call her blessed and seek her intercession. Christianity has spread to every continent, carrying Mary's story with it. Churches bearing her name dot landscapes from Arctic tundra to tropical islands. Her image appears in art galleries and humble homes, in great cathedrals and simple chapels. The Catholic Church numbers over 1 billion members worldwide. For most of them, Mary holds special place as Mother of God and their own spiritual mother. They pray to her daily, seek her help in times of trouble, and thank her for countless blessings received. Eastern Orthodox Christians, while differing on some theological points, share deep reverence for Mary. They call her Theotokos, God-bearer, and celebrate her with elaborate liturgies and beautiful icons. Her feast days mark important moments in their spiritual calendar. Even Protestant communities, despite Reformation criticisms of certain Marian practices, acknowledge her unique role in salvation history. They study her biblical appearances, admire her faith and obedience, and recognize her as model for Christian discipleship. Islam honors Mary as the greatest of women. The Quran tells her story with reverence and respect. Muslims believe in the virgin birth and consider her chosen above all other females in history. She builds bridges between faiths that often seem divided. Art galleries worldwide display masterpieces inspired by Mary. From Byzantine mosaics to Renaissance paintings, from Gothic sculptures to modern installations, artists have found endless inspiration in her story. She represents beauty, purity, love, and hope. Literature draws heavily on Marian themes. Poets write verses praising her virtues. Novelists explore her inner life. Playwrights dramatize key moments from her story. Her influence on human creativity seems inexhaustible. Music bears her mark across every genre. Gregorian chants honor her memory. Classical composers create masses and motets for her feast days. Folk songs in countless languages tell her story. Even contemporary musicians find inspiration in her example. Hospitals and schools worldwide bear her name. Charitable organizations invoke her patronage. Social justice movements draw on her Magnificat as anthem for the oppressed. Her concern for the poor and lowly continues inspiring action. Pilgrimage sites associated with Mary attract millions annually. Lourdes and Fatima, Guadalupe and Medjugorje, these places witness constant streams of believers seeking healing, hope, and spiritual renewal. Her presence seems tangible in such locations. Scientific research examines claims of Marian miracles. Medical professionals investigate reported healings. Psychologists study the impact of Marian devotion on mental health. Even skeptics acknowledge the positive effects of faith and hope she inspires. Feminist theologians reclaim Mary as woman of strength and independence. They emphasize her courage in accepting dangerous divine mission. They highlight her prophetic voice in the Magnificat. She becomes symbol of female empowerment rather than passive submission. Interfaith dialogue often centers on shared respect for Mary. Jews recognize her as faithful daughter of their tradition. Christians see her as bridge between old and new covenants. Muslims honor her as exemplar of surrender to God's will. Liberation theologians embrace Mary's preferential option for the poor. Her Magnificat speaks of God lifting up the lowly and filling the hungry with good things. She becomes patron saint of social justice movements worldwide. Popular culture continues drawing on Marian imagery. Movies tell her story to new generations. Television programs explore her historical significance. Social media spreads her image and message instantaneously across global networks. The digital age creates new forms of Marian devotion. Online prayer groups gather virtually. Apps provide rosary prayers and meditation guides. Websites share apparition messages and miracle stories. Technology serves ancient faith. Scientific discoveries add new dimensions to appreciation of her story. Archaeologists explore first-century Palestine. Historians research social conditions of her time. Anthropologists study honor-shame cultures that shaped her world. Medical advances illuminate aspects of her experience. Understanding of pregnancy and childbirth adds depth to nativity accounts. Psychology insights help explain her emotional journey. Neuroscience explores the nature of religious experience. Climate change discussions invoke Mary's concern for creation. Environmental movements draw on Catholic social teaching that includes Marian themes. She becomes advocate for protecting the earth that God entrusted to human care. Space exploration raises questions about Mary's cosmic significance. If humans colonize other worlds, will they carry her image with them? Does her motherhood extend beyond Earth's boundaries? Her story adapts to new frontiers. Genetic research prompts theological questions about Mary's nature. What does science reveal about virgin birth? How do we understand miraculous conception in light of DNA discoveries? Faith and reason continue their ancient dialogue. Mary's story provides comfort in times of global crisis. During pandemics, wars, and natural disasters, believers turn to her for protection and peace. She represents stability in chaotic times, hope in darkest hours. The future promises continued development of Marian devotion and theology. New generations will discover fresh meanings in her ancient story. Different cultures will express their love for her in unique ways. Her influence will adapt and endure. Yet beneath all change and development, Mary's essential message remains constant. She shows humanity how to say yes to God's impossible plans. She demonstrates that ordinary people can participate in extraordinary divine purposes. She proves that love triumphs over fear. From a simple village girl to the mother of billions, Mary's journey spans centuries and continents, cultures and languages. Her legacy lives on in every person who faces the impossible with faith, who chooses obedience over safety, who trusts God's goodness despite apparent darkness. The story that began with an angel's greeting continues to unfold. Each new believer who encounters Mary discovers that her yes makes their own yes possible. Her acceptance of God's plan enables others to accept theirs. The mother of Jesus becomes mother to all who follow him. In the end, Mary's greatest legacy may be her example of perfect trust. She believed God's promises when they seemed impossible. She held fast to hope when circumstances suggested despair. She remained faithful when faithfulness cost everything. Today, as always, the world needs such faith. It needs people willing to say yes to God's radical plans. It needs mothers and fathers who will trust divine goodness over human wisdom. It needs the kind of love that Mary showed, sacrificial, trusting, and transformative. Her story continues because her example remains relevant. Every generation faces its own impossible announcements from heaven. Every believer must choose between fear and faith. In Mary, they find a guide who walked this path before them and showed the way. The legacy of Mary extends beyond religious boundaries to touch every human heart that yearns for meaning, hope, and love. She represents the best of human response to divine initiative. She shows what becomes possible when ordinary people cooperate with extraordinary grace. Her yes echoes through history, enabling countless other affirmative responses to God's call. Her faith strengthens the faith of others. Her love multiplies in the hearts of those who follow her example. The simple girl from Nazareth has indeed become mother to billions, and her influence continues growing with each passing day.